What if angels were to step down into the world of men, changing the course of life forever? What if beings of light who were created to stand in the presence of the Almighty chose instead to cross the veil that separates heaven from earth? It is a thought that carries both wonder and unease, a whisper of mystery that drifts through ancient scriptures. Tonight, as you listen in calm silence, we will begin to unfold the entire story of the fallen angels as it has been preserved in the Ethiopian Bible, a story that is not rushed but told gently, so that each word feels like a step deeper into a dream. In the stillness of heaven, before the earth was filled with noise and chaos, there existed a harmony that cannot be compared to anything here below. The angels, countless in number, moved with purpose and devotion. Each one had a place, a role in the order of creation. Some guarded the mysteries of the stars, some guided the winds, some carried messages to the prophets of old, while others simply stood in endless worship, their voices rising like waves of light. Their existence was pure, untouched by corruption. They were meant to be watchers from afar, beings of spirit who did not belong to the dust of the earth. Among them were a group known as the Watchers, or Grigori. These were mighty angels entrusted with a task that sounded simple, yet carried deep responsibility. They were sent to observe the children of men, to guide quietly, never to interfere, never to bind themselves to the affairs of flesh and blood. But as eternity unfolded, and the earth grew more and more alive with men and women, with laughter and longing, the Watchers began to notice what they were never meant to desire. They saw beauty in mortal form. They saw freedom in the lives of men and women, and in their hearts, a forbidden curiosity began to stir. The heavens were vast, yet silent, while the Ea, earth below, pulsed with songs, struggles, and stories. The angels looked down from their high dwelling and felt something unfamiliar, longing. The Almighty had given them greatness, yet set a boundary they were never to cross. But boundaries, even for angels, became heavy when desire took root. Slowly, one after another, the Watchers whispered their secret thoughts until those thoughts became a dangerous plan. Imagine the hush of that moment. The stars above shining cold and clear, the mountain winds rushing, and a circle of angels gathering in secret. Their leader, Semjaza, stood among them, his voice low but resolute. He feared that if he acted alone, he would carry the blame forever, and so he bound them all with an oath. They would not step into the world of men unless they all agreed to fall together. 200 angels, mighty and radiant, swore that oath upon Mount Hermon. That single act would alter the history of heaven and earth, forever weaving sorrow into the fabric of creation. But before their descent, let us return for a moment to the stillness of heaven. It is important to remember what they gave up, for only then can the weight of their fall be understood. Angels dwelt in light that never fades. They had no hunger, no weariness, no decay. They lived in the nearness of God Himself, in a realm untouched by time. To walk away from such glory for the fleeting shadows of earthly desire was more than rebellion. It was tragedy. The Ethiopian Bible preserves this story not as a tale of curiosity, but as a warning, a remembrance of how even the brightest of beings can lose their way when the heart grows restless. When the Watchers finally descended, the world was not ready for them. Their presence was like fire falling upon dry grass. Humanity had lived in simple ways, planting, building, surviving by the strength of their hands. But with the arrival of these angels came a knowledge that was never meant for mortal minds. Weapons, enchantments, ornaments, and forbidden arts began to spread, and mankind was changed forever. The seed of their rebellion took root in the soil of earth, and its fruit would be bitter. Yet tonight, we begin only at the edge of this story. Like standing at the shore of a vast and silent sea, we have only dipped our feet into the water. Ahead lies a tale of love twisted into lust, of wisdom turned into corruption, of giants who shook the earth, and of a flood that washed the world clean. It is a story that is ancient, yet strangely close, echoing in the struggles and temptations of every age. So let your mind rest and let your thoughts drift gently as we continue this story in the nights to come. The heavens above are vast, and the silence of eternity still hangs over creation. But soon you will see how quickly that silence was broken. Before we close this first step into the story, I invite you to be part of this journey with me. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers by sharing this with someone you care about. Leave a comment with your name and the city you are listening from. It is always a joy to know where hearts are listening around the world. And if you wish to read more deeply for yourself, I will leave 2 links below. One for the complete Ethiopian Bible with all 88 books, and one for the Book of Enoch in its fullness. May peace surround you tonight. May rest find your soul, and may the Almighty grant you light in your path. Long before the first man took a breath, they were beings of light woven into the order of creation. They weren't meant to cause trouble or wander around out of curiosity. They were meant to do what God wanted. Every angel had a job to do that was as clear and perfect as the stars themselves. Some were protectors of nations, silently watching over kingdoms that rose and fell like waves on the beach. Some were messengers, moving as quickly as the wind, bringing messages from heaven to earth. There were also people whose work was a mystery, shaping the movements of the heavens and guiding the order of the universe as unseen architects of time. There were many, many angels, but one group was chosen for a job that no other angel had ever done. They were not meant to stay in the high places forever. Instead, they were supposed to watch over and guide the children of men in secret. People later called them the Grigori, but at the time they were known as the Watchers. Their eyes were supposed to be clean, and their guardianship was supposed to be quiet. They could look but not touch, to look but not get involved. Their job was both hard and dangerous, because getting too close to people made them feel the weight of their beauty and fragility, a weight that could make even the strongest spirits long for something. The Grigori were powerful, but not because they had weapons. Their presence was what made them powerful. Their faces glowed with the light of the higher realms, and when they spoke, their voices shook like deep water. But as they looked down from their posts above, something started to move inside them. But humanity, which was small and weak, held a mystery that even angels couldn't fully understand. They saw men building cities, plowing the ground, raising children, loving, crying, and singing songs that rose into the night like incense. At these times, the Watchers were not just looking, they were also longing. Mount Hermon was where a choice was made that would change both heaven and earth. Its snow-covered peak, which rose in ancient strength, seemed to pierce the sky. As if creation itself wanted to keep what was about to happen a secret, clouds gathered at its top, covering it in a veil of mystery. There, at the top, a group of Watchers came down, their glowing bodies dressed in the glory of heaven, but carrying a heavy desire inside them. The air was thick with silence, as if everything in the world was holding its breath. Semyaza was their leader, and even though he had a lot of power over them, he still felt the same longing that had trapped his followers. His voice shook like thunder in the stillness. He said to the people who had come together, "You see what I see, the daughters of men, beautiful and bright in their simplicity. They walk in the sun with a beauty that draws us to them. I would go down to them, take one for myself, and live with them." His words moved the crowd because everyone had felt the same pull, but no one had the courage to say it until now. But they were all a little unsure. Crossing that line meant giving up their duty and leaving the place they had been given. They knew how heavy that choice would be and how much it would cost. And that's why they were afraid. Semyaza looked at their faces, understood their silence, and spoke again with determination. "If I go alone, then I will have to carry the weight by myself. None may turn back if we swear an oath on this mountain and bind ourselves together. All will share the same fate." The wind on the mountain moved around them, whispering through the stone and snow as if it were echoing the seriousness of his offer. One by one, the watchers gave in. Their hearts were already swayed by desire, but they found strength in being together. Azazel, strong and restless, was one of the first to step up. Others joined in until the company was one, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to, like fire inside them. So they reached out their hands and raised them up toward the heavens, which had once been their home forever. They swore by the greatness they had seen, the light they had carried, and the holy mountain that was under their feet. Their voices rose together in a solemn vow that echoed across the heights of Hermon. At that point, they had made their choice. They were no longer just watchers. They had become something else. Beings who would give up their place in heaven for a short taste of earthly passion. The mountains saw their promise. The stones, snow, and quiet peaks seemed to take in the weight of their words, keeping them like a secret carved into the mountain's heart. From that day on, Mount Hermon was known by their name because the Watchers swore an oath there and then came down to change the course of history. Even though they swore, the air was still, like the calm before a storm. Their oath gave them strength, but it also tied them to a fate they couldn't see yet. The stars stayed on their course, and the heavens above stayed quiet. But an unseen shadow began to move, waiting for the day when their choice would pay off. Semjaza had something about him that made it impossible to ignore. He was not only a leader among the Watchers, but also a voice that could calm their doubts and give shape to their unspoken wants. His power didn't come from force. It came from how strong his beliefs were. People looked to him because he was brave enough to say out loud what they had kept to themselves. He was the spark that turned their desire into something real, the person who turned their restlessness into action. It was as if the silence itself leaned in to hear what he had to say. His words had brought them together on Mount Hermon, but he didn't just inspire a vow. He also gave them a vision of descent and a promise of life lived among people they had only seen from a distance. 200 angels, bright and huge, who had once been happy to look down from their heavenly homes, were now ready to cross the line between heaven and earth. There were a lot of them. They were big enough to change the course of history for whole nations. They had promised, and now they were getting ready. Semjaza was not only the one who suggested the path, but also the one who would lead it. He was aware of the risks. He had talked about them in public. Leaving the place given by the Most High meant going into unknown depths, but the oath had sealed their fate. He reminded them, "We go together, not one alone, but all as one. We will be strong together, and our bond will hold us together." His strong and steady voice became the anchor for their bravery. The fall wasn't sudden. It happened slowly, like the sun rising over the horizon. They left the heights, leaving behind the beauty of the realms above. Their light, which had once been like fire, became softer as they got closer to the earth. Now they were covered in shapes that wouldn't break the weak eyes of men. The sky, even though it was big and eternal, seemed to close behind them, leaving only silence in its wake. Their wings of glory folded, and their light faded until they walked not as beings that could not be reached, but as figures of great presence dressed like men. The world seemed to shake when their feet first touched the ground. The trees were quiet, the rivers stopped singing, and the air was full of stillness and awe. People couldn't understand how they looked. People stopped working where they walked, their eyes drawn to the strange beauty around them. These men were not normal. Their posture showed that they had a power that could not be hidden. Their voices were deep and powerful. Their eyes were deep and unsettling, and their height seemed to go beyond what was normal. People were amazed when they first arrived. People in the villages talked about strange visitors who came from the mountains. They were bright and friendly, but also different and strangely close. The daughters of men looked at them and felt both scared and interested. Their beauty was not of this world, but it moved the hearts of those who saw them. The sons of men felt small and weak next to these new people who seemed to hold the secrets of the heavens within them. Semjaza led his group with great care. He wasn't careless in what they did because he knew their power would spread quickly. He told them to move slowly so they could gain trust instead of making people afraid. So they lived with the people, learned their ways, listened to their songs, and sat by their fires as if they were one of them. But even though things seemed calm, the tide of change had already begun to rise. The Watchers had knowledge that had never been on Earth before. They hadn't yet shown how heavy it really was, but even their smallest actions gave hints of it. Their words shaped the minds of men, and their hands gave them skills that seemed impossible to get. They sharpened their tools, took better care of their crops, and sang songs with harmonies that came from their voices. People, in their own simple way, began to reach out for new ways to express themselves with the help of their guests. But the Watchers themselves had the biggest effect, more than skill or knowledge. The daughters of men couldn't help but be drawn to their beauty. The Watchers, who had promised to only watch, were now going beyond the line of watching. Even though Semjaza was a leader, he still had the same desires as the other people in his group. He saw that the group of 200 people who had once been bound by duty were now bound by passion. In the beginning, they weren't destructive. They were full of wonder. As people came to hear their words, the fires burned brighter at night. Kids stared at them with wide eyes, not yet understanding how much it would cost them to be so close. Elders nodded in respect, feeling that there was a mystery too deep to understand. And the Watchers got used to their new life, and the memory of heaven faded like a star lost in the light of dawn. But even then, the world was no longer in balance. The natural order, which had always been strong and unbroken, had been changed by something it was never meant to hold. The ground beneath their feet showed that they had made a choice. The skies above stayed quiet, and people, who didn't know how serious things were, welcomed them with open arms. The story of the 200 was no longer a secret whispered on a mountain. It had become part of people's lives, and the earth itself began to echo their descent. Out of the 200 who came down, one stood out because their fire burned differently than the others. Azazel was his name. He moved forward with confidence when others were unsure. Some people wished for things to happen, but he made them happen. The oath on Mount Hermon had brought them all together, but Azazel had a restless spirit that wanted to not only live among men, but also shape them, to lift the veil of hidden knowledge and give it to mortals. He paid more attention to people than his brothers did. He saw how hard they were trying, how simple they were, and how weak they were. Men used stone tools to plow the land, and their hands were calloused from the hard work. Women wore little more than woven cloth and simple beads. Their beauty was natural and unadorned. Kids played with sticks and sand. They laughed, but their world was small. To Azazel, all of this looked like it was still in the process of being finished, sharpened, polished, and changed. The earth was the first thing that happened. He taught men how to hit the ground with iron, how to melt the hidden ores below the surface, and how to pull out the metals that sparkled like secrets waiting to be revealed. Fire wasn't just a source of heat anymore. It was also a tool for bending and shaping, forging and refining. They stopped using stone tools and started using iron blades, which were sharper than anything they had ever used. Holding a sword changed a man. His posture straightened, his eyes got sharper, and his heart beat faster. In the shine of steel, a man saw not only strength, but also the chance to gain power. Azazel didn't stop there. He taught them how to make shields, hammer spears, and bend metal into armor that could protect flesh from being hit by another person. What used to be simple fights between men turned into battles, made worse by the weapons he showed them. Blood that could have been spilled with fists or stones now flowed to the ground with the edge of blades. The earth drank deeply, and the sounds of war began to echo in valleys that had only heard the sounds of herds and harvest before. But Azazel's lessons didn't stop with weapons. He looked at the women, whose beauty had already made his brothers' hearts race. He taught them how to wear gold and silver jewelry, carve precious stones, and set them into rings, bracelets, and necklaces. He taught them how to use mirrors so that they could see their faces as if they were looking at still water, but clearer and brighter. He gave them powders and paints and showed them how to make their lips redder, their eyes darker, and their skin glow more. Things that used to be natural became made, and things that used to be simple became more interesting. The women picked things up quickly. Soon, their faces sparkled in a way that made everyone look at them. The men saw them, and their desires grew stronger, and their self-control faded away like smoke in the wind. Families that used to trust each other were now unsure, and their hearts were straying because of new temptations. Azazel had shown not only the power of beauty, but also the power of desire turned into an obsession. Jewelry sparkled in the sun, drawing the attention of kids who used to love pebbles and shells. Now they reached for gold, silver, and stones that shone with an unnatural light. The desire for money began, and so did envy. One man wanted what his neighbor had. One woman compared her jewelry to another's. And slowly, the spirit of discontent spread through the hearts of all people. The most daring things Azazel taught were about the science of war itself. He didn't just show them weapons, he taught them how to use them in battle, how to form ranks, how to defend themselves, how to ambush, and how to strike with both strength and cunning. He taught them how to read the ground under their feet and how to use mountains, rivers, and forests as weapons in battle. He taught them how to send messages, use codes, and trick their enemies. With each lesson, there was more and more bloodshed, and it got worse and worse. In the past, a fight would end with a few people getting hurt. Now, whole villages could be destroyed by the fire of war. The Watchers had promised to come down together, but in these actions, Azazel became their most daring teacher, the one whose ideas spread the fastest and had the most impact. The other angels may have helped people learn about stars, plants, or charms, but Azazel's gifts went straight to the heart of what it means to be human. His lessons changed the body, the heart, the mind, and the ground. The nature of people started to, change. Men who used to find strength in work now took pride in their weapons. Women who used to find dignity in being simple now found power in painted faces and jeweled jewelry. Kids who used to run around in fields now learned to want the things their parents kept hidden in woven bags. Villages that used to be peaceful now armed themselves out of fear of their neighbors. As suspicion grew, greed grew, and desire grew until it touched every part of their lives. Azazel walked among them, pleased to see the change. He had taught them things, and they eagerly accepted them without thinking about what it would cost. In their eyes, he had brought them progress, a brilliance that made them better than their old ways. But behind that progress was a darkness that spread slowly, changing the way life on Earth worked. There used to be a lot of laughter in the evenings, but now the sound of steel clashing often drowns it out. Love used to grow in a pure way, but now it was mixed up with jealousy, pride, and unrest. The delicate balance of creation had been upset. The blood that had been spilled stained the earth, the cries of grief filled the skies, and the hearts of men and women were full of desires they couldn't control. Azazel's bold teachings changed people forever. They had entered a new world, but it was one made of steel and shadow, beauty and vanity, conflict and desire. People have always admired the women of the earth for how simple their grace is. Their laughter was soft, their eyes were bare, and their lives were tied to the rhythms of harvest and home. But when the angels walked among them and told them secrets about hidden arts, something changed in a quiet but deep way. There was powder on their eyelids, stones sparkled at their throats, and metals shone in ways that no one had ever seen before. The polished mirrors they were given showed them a different side of themselves, and the men saw them with a new and unrestrained desire. More than just decoration, the adornments became. Each bracelet or necklace told a story about status, and each painted face drew attention and stirred emotions. Women used to walk with the natural grace of creation, but now they had an extra power that could bend men's will without saying a word. Some people used it without thinking and were amazed by their new reflection. But some people quickly learned how to hide their power in beauty and how to summon and control their desire. Men's hearts became restless, their eyes became unsteady, and their desires often overruled their judgment. The peace that had kept families and neighbors together started to fade. A husband looked too long at the sparkle on another man's wife's dress. A man was jealous of the jewels his neighbor had given to his daughter. Women also started to compare themselves to each other, wondering whose bracelets were shinier and whose face people looked at the longest. What started as a gift of decoration turned into jealousy, pride, and competition. And these seeds quietly made the ground ready for bigger storms. This is where the first real fights started to grow. Men who used to fight over sheep and fields now fought over women and money. Iron swords didn't clash to protect life, but to get what they wanted. When jealousy got in the way, brothers who used to work the land together turned on each other. The ground was covered in more blood, and the cries of grief could be heard in valleys that had never heard such sorrow before. The watchers watched. Some were worried, others didn't care. But the tide had begun to flow in a way that no one could change. Azazel had given them knowledge of steel, war, and decoration, but that knowledge was no longer just knowledge. It had become a part of who they were. People were learning how to use these things and how to define themselves by them. The earth was getting more complicated, even though it used to be simple. Life, which had once been peaceful, was now moving toward unrest. The first groups of people got bigger. Villages, which had once been little more than groups of tents or huts, started to grow. People no longer stayed happy in small, scattered groups because they had weapons to protect themselves, money to trade, and sex appeal to attract others. They came together, built walls, and made rooms where a lot of people could live. These places grew not only because they needed to, but also because they wanted to. A man with treasure wanted to show it off, a woman with painted beauty wanted people to see it, and a warrior with a sharp blade wanted people to be afraid of it. This is how the first signs of cities appeared. Stone was piled higher, huts were replaced by stronger homes, and the sound of life grew louder. People traded gold and jewels in markets. Every day, the sound of hammers shaping metal echoed through the streets. Fires burned in forges not only to cook bread, but also to make weapons and jewelry. The first signs of civilization were starting to show, but as progress made noise, the shadows grew darker. The cities drew both wonder and danger. Greed and lies came with crowds. A man could get rich quickly, but he could also lose it just as quickly because someone else wanted it. Women who were praised for their looks often found themselves in a situation where they were both admired and envied. People built walls to protect themselves, but they also became places of ambition, where leaders rose not through wisdom, but through force. The world was changing, and so were the people who lived on it. At first, the facade spread slowly, like a thin crack in stone. There was a stolen jewel here, a broken promise there, a man killed out of jealousy, and a woman taken against her will. But the crack quickly got bigger. The cries of mothers who lost sons in battle filled the air, and the heavy hearts of fathers who watched their daughters be taken away at night were heard. The world used to be innocent, but it started to fall apart thread by thread until whole clothes of peace turned into clothes of blood and ash. Even though civilization was new, it had both good and bad things in it. There was a lot of trade on the streets. The fires of forges glowed, and kids ran between houses. There was still laughter, but there were also shadows that were always there. Wealth made people jealous, beauty made people want it, weapons made people fight, and ambition made people split up. This was not a civilization that grew on its own. It was shaped by knowledge that was not meant for mortals and gifts that came with curses. But people kept going, excited about what these new paths had to offer. They made things higher, better, and bigger. But every dream had a price, and with every step into the light of their new life, they walked deeper into the shadow that the Watchers had cast. No one could have predicted how the world would change. The Watchers had taken women as their companions, and their beauty was full of secrets that had been hidden in heaven. Children were born from these forbidden unions that were unlike anything else on Earth. They grew quickly, faster than normal kids, and with each season that went by, it became clear that they were not normal. Their shoulders grew wider, their hands were as strong as animals, and their voices echoed across the hills like thunder. They were the Nephilim, the giants, the children of angels and women. They were beings of both heaven and earth, but they didn't belong to either. When they first walked among people, their presence filled them with awe that quickly turned to fear. A boy born from this union was taller than his father before he became a man. He grew so tall that he could almost touch the tops of city walls with his head. Their height wasn't just a way to measure size, it was also a shadow over the people. The ground shook when they walked into a village. Men put their hands over their ears when they spoke loudly because the sound was too much. The giants were hungry in ways that normal people weren't. Their bodies needed more than fields could give them. One Nephilim could eat enough food for a whole family, and soon whole herds were gone. The grain that had been stored for winter disappeared in a matter of days, leaving the villages hungry while the giants continued to eat. Men watched helplessly as their crops were taken away. Their arms were useless against beings whose strength could bend iron like clay. Fear spread like smoke. Moms held on to their kids when they saw the shadows of giants at the edge of the fields. Fathers stood still, knowing that their spears and blades were useless against creatures with skin that felt like stone. The Nephilim didn't always bring violence, but just seeing them was enough to take away people's peace. Their power was a crown, and their height was a throne. They were rulers just by being there. Eventually, they learned how to use the weapons that their angelic fathers had taught men how to make. Giants holding swords that used to make people proud made them look even scarier. A sword as long as a man's arm became a dagger to them, and they could hit with it with terrifying ease. Bows that were bigger than anyone had ever seen could shoot arrows that went through walls and shields. The tools of war became weapons of unstoppable destruction in our hands. Villages and towns bowed down to them. Some Nephilim called themselves kings and demanded tribute from people in valleys with loud voices. Others moved like predators, taking what they wanted and leaving behind ruins where laughter used to be. People whispered their names in fear, and stories spread from person to person about giants who walked across mountains, lifted boulders like kids lift pebbles, and drank rivers until the water ran low. But their rule was more than just power. Their eyes had the strange light of their angelic fathers, and they were smarter than just being strong. They weren't just big animals. They were beings who understood what it meant to want something. They got their act together, leading groups of warriors, carving out land, and building monuments that were taller than anything else men had built. They wanted more than just food. They wanted power, respect, and control over the lives of fragile mortals. The people, who were small in comparison, had a hard time with the weight. They gave their daughters up in fear, hoping to make them happy. To keep their families alive, they gave up their grain, their herds, and even their homes. Still, the giants came back because they were always hungry. The earth's balance was off. Men used to live in peace with each other, but now these beings who walked like moving mountains cast a shadow over their lives. Children heard the heavy footsteps of giants in the distance as they grew up. Their mothers whispered warnings instead of singing them to sleep. Men stopped talking about peace because it seemed so fragile, like it could be broken by one blow from a giant's hand. Fear was now a real thing in the world, and it wore flesh and blood, but was taller than any human could ever be. Legends quickly began to form because people needed to know why there were giants. Some people said they were gods who had come down to rule. People said that they were punishments sent to men for being foolish. But there was always a thread of fear in every story and every whispered account. People no longer felt safe, not even the strongest man, who was like a child in front of the Nephilim. There were still times when their power made people feel both awe and fear. Some built amazing things, like walls and structures that were taller than anything humans could make on their own. They lifted stones that were too heavy for 100 men to lift. Cities grew because of their forced labor. Monuments rose, and people looked on in horror and amazement. Their presence changed civilization itself, but underneath the beauty was oppression and despair. The Nephilim didn't have to talk a lot to be in charge. Their shadows ruled before their voices did, and their desires were stronger than any law. People were caught between fear and admiration and bent to their will. And as the seasons went by, the giants got bolder, spreading their power even more, their hunger never ending and their rule more complete. The world had changed. Fields that used to be full of life were now empty. Villages that used to be safe were now scared. And men who used to walk with pride were now looking down. The giants, who were born in heaven and earth, were now among mortals, but they were not equals. They were masters. Even though they were tall and powerful, their presence brought with it the weight of corruption, a shadow that spread across the world and touched every corner. The giants were never happy. Their hunger grew like a fire that no water could put out as soon as they tasted human food. For them, a single bite of bread was enough to feed a family for a week. Herds of sheep vanished in a single day, and people carried whole flocks on their shoulders as if they were no heavier than bundles of grass. Cattle that used to feed villages were killed in seconds, and their meat was eaten by hands that were too strong to stop. The Nephilim ate without stopping, as if their bodies were made for an endless feast. The villagers quickly figured out that their crops would never be enough. The giants stomped on fields of wheat that had been carefully tended through the seasons, crushing the golden stalks before they could be picked. The little that was left was picked up by huge hands, but the grains fell through fingers that were too big to hold them. Barley and corn, fruits and figs, all disappeared into the mouths of beings whose appetites knew no bounds. Men who used to sing songs to celebrate the harvest now stood by and watched as their work was stolen right in front of them. The Nephilim were hungry not just for food, but also for power. They turned to the people themselves when their stomachs were empty. It started with threats and demands for more tribute. Villages gave everything they had: grain, wine, oil, and flocks. But it was never enough. The giants got restless when their supplies ran out. Their tempers flared like storms, and their cruelty showed itself in new and horrible ways. They attacked the people who had helped them, their hands reaching for things that could no longer be given. Quickly, the stories spread. Travelers told stories of giants who ate everything in front of them and then turned on the weak. People who still had some food hidden in their homes heard stories of whole villages that were left empty, and their fear grew. The shadow of famine grew larger because even in places where giants had not yet walked, people knew they would come. The world seemed too small to hold them and too weak to handle their greed. People tried to hide their food in some places. Grain was buried deep in the ground, sealed in jars, and hidden in caves. Desperate men drove livestock into the hills and hid them in forests, where they were watched over day and night. But the Nephilim were not easy to fool. Their senses seemed to be sharper than those of humans. They could smell the faint sweetness of figs, hear the muffled bleating of sheep, and see the faint smoke from fires that were lit to cook hidden meals. There was no secret they couldn't find. Their anger was great when they found out what had been hidden. They killed men who fought back and left their bodies as warnings for anyone else who might try to keep what little they had left. As the food on the earth ran out, their hunger turned into violence. The giants went after men as well as animals and crops. What they had never thought of doing became their new way of life. They started eating the flesh of people who could no longer help them, turning villages into hunting grounds. The cries of the oppressed echoed through the night, but no one could help them because the Watchers' sons were too powerful. The land itself showed how bad things were. Valleys that used to be fertile turned into wastelands because they ate everything in sight. Vineyards used to grow on hillsides, but now they are empty, with their vines torn down and trampled. The rivers were muddy with the blood of the dead, and the air was thick with the smell of death. What had been made for beauty and plenty was now a scary place. Life became about survival because of the Nephilim. Families huddled together in dark caves, afraid to light fires that would show where they were hiding. The kids cried quietly, and their moms told them to be quiet so their voices wouldn't carry. Men who used to walk proudly through their fields now moved quietly through the shadows, hoping no one would see them. The weight of their oppression made everything seem smaller. Fear followed the giants wherever they went, like a herald. Rumors spread like wildfire even before their huge shapes could be seen on the horizon. "They are coming," the people whispered, and those words took away all hope. The Nephilim's shadow was not only their physical presence, but also the fear that came with the thought of them. The world was becoming a place where fear was always present. Every morning people wondered if the giants would come that day. Even the strong gave up hope. Warriors who used to protect their people saw that their spears and shields were useless. Weapons broke against the bodies of giants, and their blows were so strong that they broke bones and killed people. There was no wall or fortress that could keep them out. People knew that no place on earth could guarantee safety after cities and villages fell just as easily. The Nephilim's shadow was over the land and in the hearts of men. They brought despair with them, taking away the courage of the strongest and the peace of the gentlest. People felt like they were wandering, even in their own homes, because they didn't feel like they belonged anywhere and there was no solid ground to stand on. It seemed like the earth itself was against them, because giants were always nearby. And yet, the Nephilim's hunger grew stronger. Their hunger was never satisfied, and their cruelty had no limits. What started as domination through fear turned into destruction through violence, and what started as feasting on the earth turned into consuming everything that was on it. The shadow grew longer, covering the land and reaching into every part of human life. The giants walked like lords of terror, and the people trembled under their rule, waiting in silence for the sound of footsteps that shook the ground. The giants, who were strong and full of food, soon got bored with their never-ending feasting. Their arguments went from quiet whispers of competition to violent storms. One giant wanted to be king, but another giant fought him. Their fights shook the ground beneath their feet. Their roars filled the air, and their huge weapons clashed like thunder, making the hills shake. The blood of both men and giants turned rivers red. What started as hunger and power turned into war for no reason, with endless fighting that left destruction in its wake. In their rage, they not only ate animals and the crops of the land, but they also turned against all of humanity. Their huge jaws ripped through flesh, and their teeth gnawed on the lives of people who used to be scared and amazed by them. Villages turned into feasts, and the cries of the innocent mixed with the roars of giants eating. Fathers who tried to protect their homes were killed right away. There was no mercy for mothers who protected their kids. The Nephilim didn't care if someone was young or old. They all became prey. This bloodshed made the earth groan. The fields were no longer green. They were dark where battles and killings had taken place. The forests that used to be full of birdsong were now quiet, except for the cries of the hunted. Rivers that used to give life now carried the bodies of violence downstream, bringing sadness from one valley to the next. The order of creation was turned upside down, and it seemed like everything alive was afraid of the world's cruelty. The people were too tired and broken to take it anymore. The wind carried their cries of desperation up into the sky. Men and women got together in secret places, raised their hands in prayer, and cried until the ground was wet. They all cried out together, begging for help. They cried out, "O God of heaven, don't you see what has happened to the earth? Don't you hear your children's cries? Please have mercy on us. We can't do anything against these destroyers." Their cries grew louder every night, each word full of pain and desire. Their prayers echoed far and wide, over mountains and valleys, forming a chorus of sorrow. The voice of the whole earth was rising in unison, no longer just the voice of one village or one people. The ground, soaked with innocent blood, seemed to cry out. The ground itself was a witness, as if creation wanted its maker's justice. Every man was afraid back then. Farmers who used to be happy to see the morning sun now shook with fear when they went outside, not knowing if their homes would still be standing by night. Kids cried themselves to sleep, not just because they were hungry, but because their nightmares came true every day. The air smelled like destruction, and the sadness was so heavy that it felt like it was pressing on every heart. The giants were so crazy that they didn't realize how much pain they had caused. As they fought each other, their laughter sounded like thunder. They tore down the cities they had once ruled. Their fights left lands empty, their feasts left fields bare, and their cruelty broke hearts. People were on the verge of extinction, and the world itself cried out for help. Some of the people still tried to fight back, even though they were weak. Groups of men armed with whatever they could find fought in desperation, but the Nephilim were too strong for them. Spears broke against bodies that looked like stone. The arrows went deep into their flesh, leaving only shallow wounds that made them angry instead of weak. Each act of defiance led to more violence, and the cries of the dead added to the grief that was rising to heaven. The women prayed and sang songs of sadness that rose above the ruins. They didn't sing to the giants, they sang to the heavens. Their songs were full of longing and trembled. "O Lord of all spirits," they said through tears, "look at what you have made. Look at how it is ripped apart. Listen to our cries, because we have no other place to go but you." Their songs sounded like incense, and their words rose higher than the smoke from the fires that burned down their villages. It looked like even the animals were groaning under the weight of the destruction. The giants' never-ending hunger made the herd spread out and their numbers drop. Birbirs, Diaz no longer flew together in flocks. Instead, they flew around in a panic. The beasts of the field ran deeper into the woods because they knew that the world of men was no longer safe. The balance between creation and people had been broken, and everything showed signs of violence. The earth itself became a witness, as if the ground absorbed the pain of the people who were being hurt. The land seemed to mourn where blood had soaked the ground, refusing to give up its fruit as it had before. The giants trampled the crops, and corruption spread like a disease, making them fail. The earth, which used to be full of life, was quieted, its beauty ruined, and its wealth stolen. The cries of people and the cries of creation rose up together, never-ending and full of need. It was a song of sadness that was too heavy for mortal hearts to bear alone and reached the very throne of heaven. Men knelt in fields, stripped bare. Mothers cried in homes that had been burned to the ground, and children cried out in voices that were too broken to make words. The sound of their pain filled the air, bouncing off the stars and begging for mercy, for help, and for the God who made the heavens and the earth to answer. The giants kept being violent, not knowing how strong those prayers were. Their wars went on, their flesh feasts went on, and their laughter shook the ground. But above the noise, the cries of the faithful rose, and those cries were not lost. Even though men couldn't see it yet, the heavens were listening. God, who made both people and angels, stretched the skies over the earth and put the stars in their places. He was not deaf to the pain of his creation. The sadness of all people had reached its peak, and their desperation brought them together in a single voice of prayer. Even though they were small and broken, their prayers were so strong that no giant could stop them. And in the quiet between the cries and the stillness of the night sky, it looked like heaven itself bent down to listen, holding the weight of their grief in its hands forever. The cries of people did not go away into silence. They went up higher than the mountains, higher than the clouds, and into the courts of heaven. The great angels who were closest to God's throne heard the cries of men, women, and children who were in pain. These were not ordinary messengers. They were the powerful ones who were given the job of caring for creation and had a role in the order of the universe. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel were archangels who had both power and love in equal measure. Michael, the warrior and protector, looked down at the world with sadness in his eyes. He was in charge of protecting God's people and leading the armies of heaven against the forces of chaos. Now what he saw made him sad. The Nephilim ran wild, eating up the land and its people and making fun of the balance of creation. Michael's voice shook with both anger and sadness as he looked up at the Eternal One, hoping for justice to be done. Gabriel, the angel who brought God's words to people, stood there in quiet sadness. He was used to bringing good news and telling people what God wanted them to do so they could walk in the light. But now his job was harder, because how could he bring a message when the world was in such despair? He felt pain in his heart as he heard prayers rising from the ground, thousands of voices begging for help. Gabriel wanted to comfort them, but he knew that only the Most High had the power to do so. Raphael, the healer, felt the pain of creation as if it were cutting into him. His job had always been to fix things, to heal what was broken, and to ease the pain of both the body and the mind. But now, the wounds were too deep, and the corruption was too widespread for him to fix. The land was damaged, the people were hurt, and even the animals were scared. He bowed low, silently begging God to heal through judgment, because only fire from heaven could cleanse what the Watchers and their children had polluted. The light of God, Uriel, looked down with a gaze that cut through the darkness. His job had always been to bring light, to reveal the secrets of heaven and the ways of truth. He saw darkness spreading like smoke over the earth, filling both cities and valleys. The Watchers had planted the seeds of war, lust, and corruption, and now the fruit of those seeds had grown into destruction. Uriel's voice was serious as he looked up and asked the Almighty to bring clarity and justice to the world and end the confusion that had taken over. These 4 archangels were all witnesses. They had seen the Watchers come down, the line between heaven and earth break, and the chaos that followed. They had heard the vows made on Mount Hermon, which were the promises that the fallen angels would keep their rebellion going. They had seen how knowledge that was once hidden was carelessly spread among people, causing violence, vanity, and death. And now they heard the cries of the whole world for help, their voices rising like a flood to the sky. The archangels had to speak up. They looked toward God's throne, where light uncreated shone with eternal purity. Their voices, full of respect, came together in prayer. They yelled, not for themselves, but for the hurting earth. Michael said, "Lord of all," and his voice sounded like many waters. "Look at the blood that stains your creation. See how the giants crush men and women whom you made in your image, and how the Watchers' works corrupt them. Their cries never stop. Will you not respond to them?" Gabriel added his plea, and his words were like a soft wind that carried sadness. "Master of all spirits, you gave the earth to your creation, but it has been polluted. The Watchers, who were supposed to stay in their place, have broken heaven's rules. They are bound in rebellion, and their children stomp on the world. The air is full of the prayers of good people. They ask for your mercy, Lord. Listen to them." Raphael put his head down and spoke with a heavy heart. "O Holy One, you see how the sickness has spread. You can see how blood cries out from the ground, how bodies are broken, and how the earth itself grieves. People can't heal themselves. Only your command can bring things back to life. Only your judgment can clean up what has been ruined." Uriel spoke with clear seriousness, his eyes glowing with divine light. "You are the Lord of eternity, and you know everything. You know everything. The Watchers have told us about secrets that should not be known, changing what was pure. Their kids eat people and spread fear all over the place. The earth is covered in darkness, but you are light forever. The shadows will run away if you speak. Justice will be restored if you act." Their words rose up together, a chorus of sadness and respect that echoed through the courts of heaven. They didn't give orders, because no angel could tell the Eternal what to do. But they begged, their voices mixed with the cries of men, women, and children below. Their petition was heavy, carrying not only the sadness of the earth, but also the desire of heaven itself for things to get back to normal. And the throne of God, shining with glory, answered with silence that was full of meaning, not empty. It was as if the Eternal was listening to the cries of his creation and making plans for justice in the silence. The archangels bowed low and waited, their wings folded in respect and their faces hidden because they were in awe of his greatness. They knew that the earth would shake and the sky would move when he spoke. His word would bring both judgment and mercy, cutting through corruption like fire through dry grass. The archangels waited, their hearts steady, even though time in heaven did not flow like it did on earth. They had done what they were supposed to do. They had brought the cries of Kran, Ishan, to its creator. The Eternal, whose wisdom is beyond measure, now had to make the choice. The earth below kept crying, the giants kept destroying everything, and the Watchers were happy with their rebellion, but the throne of God, which was the source of all power and justice, stayed strong above everything else. The archangels were sad, but they still had hope. They knew that when God was quiet, he was getting ready, not gone. They knew that when he did answer, it would not only answer the cries of people, but it would also restore the balance that had been lost. They stayed in front of the throne, waiting for his command with the patience that comes from eternity, hoping that his judgment would not take too long. God answered the prayers of people and the requests of the archangels. The voice of the Almighty came from the throne of glory. It was as big as eternity and unshaken. His command cut through the sky like fire, and his judgment was set. The Watchers' rebellion and the cruelty of their children would not go on forever. He had heard the cries of the oppressed, and now his order would come down on those who had ruined the earth. The first command was for Azazel, who had told people how to kill and fight. His teachings had poisoned people's hearts, making them make weapons and jewelry that fed both vanity and violence. The Eternal One said that Azazel would no longer be able to walk freely on the earth. His fate was sealed, and his corruption was limited. "Bind Azazel's hands and feet," was the word. "Put him in the desert of Dudael and lock him up there." The angels who were supposed to judge didn't hesitate. They came down quickly, their light cutting through the darkness that clung to the ground. Azazel, who used to be proud, now shook as their light surrounded him. He had loved the chaos he had caused, teaching men to fight and women to be vain, but when he was in front of God, his strength failed. The powerful ones put him in chains that could not be broken, made not by people, but by God's own will. Azazel was taken to the place where he would be imprisoned after being carried across the burned-out wilderness. The Dudael desert was huge and empty, with barren sands and a heavy silence. It was a separate place, away from where people lived, where there was no water and no life. The angels made his pit here. It was a deep hole in the rock that was dark and suffocating. They threw him into this pit, cutting him off from the world he had ruined. Around his prison were stones with jagged edges, and above him was a covering that kept any light from heaven or earth from reaching him again. The order meant not only imprisonment, but also shame. He would get dust and darkness, and he would never see glory, honor, or freedom. His name, which used to scare men, became a mark of shame, a reminder of how corrupt his teachings had made people. The chains that held him captive echoed the eternal truth. No matter how clever, no rebellion can win against the will of the Most High. But Azazel wasn't the only one who judged. The voice of God went on, telling Semjaza, the leader of the Watchers, and everyone else who had sworn oaths on Mount Hermon to be bound as well. These were the people who had given up their heavenly home and left their pure place to live with the daughters of men. They had crossed the line between heaven and earth, which had caused both to be destroyed. The punishment fit the crime. They were locked up until the day of final judgment. The angels from heaven spread out over the earth to do what they were told. The watchers were caught one by one. Semjaza, who had once made them feel guilty by promising to share their guilt, now shook with fear of the justice he couldn't escape. His words that used to have power now sounded empty because no argument could change what God had said. He and his friends were tied up and stripped of their false glory. Their faces were pushed into the dirt. They were thrown into dark pits deep below the mountains and valleys. The chains that held them were made by God and could not be broken. They were made by the Creator's own words. There they would stay, held in silence, until the day when all rebellion would be judged with fire. Their cries, which had once been loud and defiant, turned into whispers that the stones that buried them swallowed. The earth itself seemed to groan as the pits were closed, as if they were heavy with the weight of their confinement. Even though the Nephilim had destroyed a lot of things, people on earth started to feel a change. The unseen forces that had been hurting them were being held back. The fear that filled the skies got quieter, but the giants were still angry and hungry as they walked around. But for the first time in a long time, prayers rose with a hint of hope, because God's hand was moving and his judgment was starting to take shape. Azazel's prison in the desert stayed as a warning, a scar on the earth where rebellion had been put down. The dry sands of Dudael held his chains, and even though people couldn't see him, he was still there, like a shadow. People said that the ground there had scars from fire and stone, which were reminders of what had been done to keep him from getting away. His name came to stand for corruption, and his death proved that even the strongest angel could not go against the will of heaven. People couldn't see Semjaza and his followers because they were bound in the depths. People told their stories in whispers, passing them down from one generation to the next. They became examples of fallen glory, of people who had traded the beauty of heaven for the dirt of earth, only to find themselves stuck in chains they had made for themselves. They weren't done when they were locked up. They were just waiting, holding on until the day when everyone would have to answer to the eternal judge. The archangels who had asked for justice now stood in solemn awe, watching as the Almighty's orders were carried out. Michael, the warrior, saw the rebels in chains and knew that the armies of heaven would win. Gabriel, the messenger, understood that God's justice was both mercy and wrath. He carried the weight of God's order. Raphael, the healer, felt a little better because the source of a lot of the world's pain was now quiet. Uriel, the light, saw the truth unfold, knowing that the word of the Eternal could never be defeated by darkness. Even though judgment had started, the earth still had wounds that would take a long time to heal. The giants walked around without being stopped. Their hunger never stopped, and their cruelty never stopped. But the binding of Azazel and the Watchers changed everything. The balance of creation was starting to change because the heavens had spoken. People were still scared of destruction, but they were no longer alone in their cries. The hand of God was moving against the corruption that had spread across the world, and his justice had come down. The quiet of the pits and the emptiness of the desert spoke louder than words. Everyone who heard the stories, whether they were angels or men, knew that the Most High rules over everything, and that no rebellion, no matter how brave, can escape his command. The huge giants that used to scare people all over the world began to fall under the weight of judgment. Their great strength, which had ruled over villages and scared people, could not save them from what heaven had planned for them. The earth shook as if it were sighing with relief when their bodies fell, but their deaths brought about a new and even stranger mystery. The Nephilim were different from regular people because they had both angelic power and human flesh inside them. Their souls didn't just disappear into silence when they died. Instead, they stayed around, restless, wandering, and refusing to give in to either heaven above or the grave below. The idea of wandering spirits first came to light in this strange time between life and death. They were not given peace, and they were not tied to God's holy presence. They drifted, unseen but deeply felt, haunting the lands they once ruled with iron fists and insatiable appetites. They were still hungry, but now that they didn't have bodies, their hunger became more evil and insatiable. They didn't want bread or wine. They wanted the energy of living things, the warmth of human life, and the whispers of fear that kept villages up at night. People started to feel them. During the quiet hours, when the wind carried strange sounds or shadows seemed longer than they should have, farmers and shepherds would talk about the spirits of the giants. Mothers calmed down kids who woke up screaming from dreams where huge shapes were still chasing them. Elders talked about curses that seemed to stay on the ground where the Nephilim had walked. Even though their horrible bodies were gone, they were still on earth. The world had gotten rid of the bodies of giants, but their spirits were still there, like smoke after a fire, clinging to everything around them. People gave these lost souls many names over the years. They became the source of stories about jinn and demons, forces that whisper from places we can't see and either tempt us or hurt us. They were the restless breath of rebellion, the echo of the long-ago union between angels and people. These spirits got their giant father's cruelty and arrogance, but without bodies, they became harder to find and less predictable. You couldn't hit them with swords or tie them up with ropes. They could move around without being seen, getting into the corners of human life and spreading fear, division, and despair. Their invisible rule made the world seem smaller. Men used to be afraid of the huge shadows of giants, but now they are afraid of things they can't see, like whispers in the dark, sickness that seemed to have no cause, and fights that broke out for no reason. Farmers talked about animals that died overnight, their eyes rolling as if they were being haunted by things they couldn't see. People who were traveling said they heard footsteps behind them, but no one was there. Healers had a hard time with sudden craziness that affected whole families, as if spirits had taken up residence in their minds like unwanted guests. The archangels in heaven looked down on this terrible event with deep understanding. They knew that these were the last traces of the fallen one's sin, the last mark on humanity. Raphael and Gabriel, who had already judged the Watchers, knew that the evil that had been planted in the earth had not died with the giants' bodies. It had changed, though, becoming something more spiritual and lasting. These were no longer fleshly tyrants who could be killed with a knife. They were now eternal echoes of corruption that would last until the time of final judgment. Priests and wise men started to make up prayers and rituals to protect themselves from these spirits. People lit fires at night to keep them away, burned herbs to clean the air, and whispered chants to keep them away. But even these efforts often seemed pointless because the spirits were clever and could get through cracks in faith and fear. People told stories about men who heard the whispers of these invisible beings and learned dark secrets and hidden skills. These kinds of men became powerful for a while, but their power was always cursed and turned against them, leading to their downfall. So people were in danger from two things. Resisting the spirits meant suffering their pain, while accepting them meant inviting corruption. The restless dead of the giants were the first people to tell stories about demons and jinn. These spirits, on the other hand, did not belong in heaven. They didn't find peace in the grave like men did. Their presence was a constant reminder of the rebellion that had once rocked both the earth and the heavens. They traveled through deserts, caves, ruins, and other places where few people go. In these empty places, their voices seemed to rise with the wind, calling out to the weak, the lonely, and the broken-hearted. They grew stronger on fear and fed on hopelessness. Over the years, the Nephilim became a myth, but people still had encounters with spirits. People who had long since forgotten the names of the giants still told stories about creatures that roamed the night. Their names changed from culture to culture. They were sometimes called shadow spirits, jinn, or demons. But the main idea was the same in every version. The restless children of rebellion still haunt humanity as invisible remnants of an old sin. People still talk about unseen forces that affect their lives. Belief in lingering spirits is linked to strange bad luck, voices that can't be explained, and shadows that flicker for no reason. People have called them demons, jinn, or restless shades. They have been around since the days when giants fell and their souls were not allowed to rest. They are the continuation of a story that began with forbidden unions and violent appetites, and their presence has echoed through time, shaping beliefs, myths, and fears in every corner of the earth. People thought they would be free when the giants were killed, but that wasn't the end. It was a change. The body gave way to the spirit, and the body's tyranny became the unseens. People had been freed from terrible rulers who were very tall, but now they had to deal with an enemy that, yet, was invisible and lasted for generations. These spirits still remember the rebellion and the sin of the Watchers. They are restless until the last word is spoken from the throne of heaven. The world that used to be full of peaceful valleys, flowing rivers, and fields full of grain was no longer the same. What started as a few small acts of rebellion had turned into a storm that swept across the whole world. Life's balance had been thrown off, and people were stuck under layers of fear, oppression, and destruction. In villages where there was no more bread, the cries of children could be heard. For a long time, the songs of shepherds had been silenced. Instead, there were sounds of grief, because families buried loved ones not just because of the war, but also because of the chaos that affected every part of their lives. Corruption covered up the beauty of creation, and every day brought with it the weight of despair. People who used to work together to farm and build homes now fought with each other. The Nephilim's violence taught humans their darkest lessons, and even after the giants fell, their effects stayed in people's hearts. Instead of being friends, they became enemies. Instead of being nice, they were mean. Fair trade no longer worked in markets. Instead, every deal was based on greed and lies. There was no longer trust, only doubt. The rebellious spirit that started with angels spread like a disease, and men who had once been afraid of violence and corruption started to act like it. Corruption got into families, communities, and the very fabric of society. Bloodshed happened so often that it felt like the earth itself was groaning under the weight of all the lives that had been lost. People who wanted peace were often silenced by people who wanted power. The strong crushed the weak, and the cries of widows and orphans rose into the air like incense of sadness. The ground even looked tired, not giving up crops like it used to. The earth was tired because of the sins of both angels and humans who rebelled. As time went on, different kinds of Chati Che Duyos, O's appeared. Idolatry spread thanks to the whispers of wandering spirits who had inherited the giants' evil. Men carved stones, built shrines, and raised their hands in worship to the very beings that had killed them. They didn't ask the Creator for help. Instead, they asked shadows and spirits for help, who promised them power in exchange for loyalty. So the corruption got worse, and people became slaves to the very things they should have fought against. The world turned into a place where light had a hard time shining, where lies hid the truth, and where goodness felt like a long-lost memory. It was not just wars and bloodshed that showed how violent the time was. It was also part of everyday life. Betrayal ended marriages. Kids grew up in fear instead of safety. Not only were the roads haunted by bandits, but also by distrust, as even friends turned on each other to get ahead. Corruption had spread like fire through dry grass, so there was no place that wasn't affected. It was in the mountains, the valleys, the forests, and the cities. In this world of despair and ruin, whispers of one man began to stand out like a quiet flame in a storm. There were many people who had given up to darkness, but one of them lived a life that was different from the others. Noah was his name. He didn't have a lot of gold or a lot of armies, but he did have something more valuable: faith. Noah looked up at the carved stones, but others looked up at the Creator. While others bowed to rebellious spirits, Noah listened for the voice of God. Noah lived in a time when doing the right thing seemed impossible, but he walked with quiet strength. He didn't spend his days giving big speeches or showing off his power. Instead, he did small things that showed he was obedient. When others cheated, he worked his fields honestly. When others were cruel to their families, he was kind to his. His Heshard. Held on to the memory of what the world was supposed to be like, and even though the storm of corruption raged around him, he never lost faith in that vision. People around him made fun of how devoted he was. They laughed at the thought of worshiping a god they no longer feared. They thought of Noah as an old man who held on to values that didn't matter anymore. But Noah didn't give up. He remembered what many had forgotten, that the Creator was still in charge of the heavens and the earth, still watched and still listened. Noah knew that the heavens weren't really silent. They were just waiting. The world around Noah was wrong, and his life showed it. He showed how others were rebelling by quietly obeying. His prayers reminded him of what people had lost. And even though his voice was small compared to the roar of corruption, it was steady. When others were looking for advice from spirits at night, Noah prayed to the one true God. His prayers rose like a thread of light into the sky, a sign of hope in a world full of sadness. Every year, the earth around him got worse. There was no reason for blood to be shed. Corruption spread across the land, and even the animals seemed agitated, as if creation itself wanted to be fixed. The heavens looked down and saw not only the sins of angels, but also the sins of people who chose to rebel against the truth. It wasn't just that the giants ruled with violence. People followed their example, causing more destruction with each generation. But Noah's faith didn't waver, even in this dark time. People who still remembered bits of truth whispered his name as a sign of hope. Families who were oppressed and in pain sometimes talked about him, wondering if maybe his God hadn't completely left them. Noah's life showed that not everything was lost, even though the world seemed hopeless. It was like the Creator had planted a seed of goodness in him, and it was waiting for the right time to grow. The heavens were getting ready to act as violence and corruption spread. People who were being oppressed had not gone unheard. The earth's cries had not gone unheard. Noah's life was a sign that the story of mankind was not over, even though things were crazy. He was chosen not because of his strength or numbers, but because of his heart. His heart walked with God when everyone else turned away. The story of Noah was just starting, but his presence in a broken world showed a deep truth. Even when things were at their worst, when rebellion seemed impossible to stop and corruption seemed impossible to stop, one life of faith could shine like a star in the night. Heaven looked down on Noah and saw a man through whom a new chapter could begin, even though the earth was groaning under the weight of sin. Noah's name meant a lot more than most people his age could ever say. In a time when darkness seemed to cover the whole world and corruption and violence drowned out almost all signs of goodness, he was one of the few men whose heart was not affected by the rebellion around him. His role wasn't based on power, money, or armies. It was based on a pure spirit that set him apart in a world that was falling apart because of its own sins. He was not only a good man living among bad people, he was the chosen vessel through which the Creator's will would be kept. The scriptures say that Noah's Salim Fitrat, or pure and unblemished nature, was the most important part of his character. Noah's heart wanted to be in harmony with the Creator, unlike the people around him who were greedy, lustful, and violent. He wasn't perfect, but he was loyal. His choices showed that he wanted the truth at a time when it was being ignored. He had the qualities that heaven valued most: honesty, humility, and devotion. God loved him for these reasons, and they made him stand out from everyone else in his generation. Noah wasn't just a survivor, he was also a link between the old world and the new. He showed that it was still possible for people to go back to their original design and that they were not beyond saving. His life showed the world that it was still possible to be honest even when things were very corrupt. While others prayed to idols, Noah prayed to the Creator. While others filled their homes with violence, Noah took care of peace. His example was a living proof, a light that broke through the darkness of his time. But this difference came at a price. People were making fun of Noah all around him. People were uncomfortable around him because his righteousness showed how they were rebelling. They made fun of how devoted he was, thought his prayers were silly, and thought his faith was weak. But Noah kept going. His strength didn't come from how many people followed him, but from how consistent he was. He had the same heart of devotion every morning when he got up. When he went to bed at night, he prayed to his Creator to end the day. He didn't think he was successful if people liked him. He thought he was successful if heaven looked at him. The Creator saw something rare in Noah, a man who not only believed, but also lived according to his beliefs. In a time when sin had hardened many hearts, Noah's heart stayed soft. Noah lived in a world where almost everyone was selfish, but he was humble. This made him a vessel that could carry out God's will. He didn't just get picked at random. He got ready by being obedient. His faith made it possible for God's favor to be on him, and that favor was the start of a plan that would change history forever. When God told Noah about the coming judgment, his role grew. Heaven had to do something about the world's corruption, violence, and rebellion. But Noah showed mercy even when he was judging. He was given the knowledge of what way is going to happen, and he wasn't just going to watch. He was going to be a part of it. His job was to get ready, build, and keep life going. This duty was huge, but it showed how much God trusted him. To understand Noah's role, you need to see more than just a man building a ship. You need to see a man who is carrying the future of humanity on his shoulders. His obedience was not just about him living, but about creation itself living. It wasn't just wood and pitch that made up the ark he would one day build. It was faith made real. Every plank that was put in place showed that Noah trusted God. Every nail that was driven in showed that he believed in God. And every day that he spent getting ready showed that he walked with God, even when the rest of the world made fun of him. Noah's character was not formed by sudden inspiration, but by a lifetime of steadfastness. He had a relationship with the Creator long before he was told to build the ark. It was in the quiet times, like when they prayed under the stars, and when they made small choices to be honest and do the right thing when they were tempted, that their relationship grew. These daily acts of devotion got him ready for the bigger calling that lay ahead. Noah was ready when the time came for divine instruction. He wasn't special in any way, but he had always been faithful. People thought Noah was alone in the world, but he was really with heaven. The Creator's favor was all around him, shaping his life, guiding his path, and getting him ready for the job ahead. He was a patient man who waited for God's timing when others rushed into chaos. He was brave because he stood firm in his faith when others gave in to fear. He was the very definition of trust because he believed in what he couldn't see. He was more than a prophet and a leader. He was the vessel through which a small group of good people would survive. The flood that was coming, Noah had a big impact on his family. His wife and sons saw how devoted he was, and even though the world around them was falling apart because of sin, they were drawn to his faithfulness. Noah was a good leader who was not harsh or bossy. He was steady and kind, just like the God he served. He led his family not by force but by example, teaching them to trust, to be strong, and to keep hope alive even when everything else seemed lost. His family joined a covenant that was much bigger than them through him. This covenant would bring life to a new world. Noah's story is very human, but it also has a lot of meaning from God. His role shows that one person's obedience can change the course of history. The Creator's plan was huge, including judgment and renewal. But it all depended on the faith of one man who was brave enough to live differently. Noah wasn't chosen because he was the most powerful, the loudest, or the most important. He was chosen because his heart was in line with what the Creator wanted. He became a light of hope in a world that had lost its way because of his simplicity, humility, and purity. Noah's faith never wavered, even as the days of corruption went on. His story teaches us that being good doesn't depend on the world around us, but on the choices we make. His life showed that it was possible to walk with God, even in the most corrupt time. Noah's job wasn't just to survive judgment. It was also to keep the door open for everyone to be saved. His Salim Fitrat, or uncorrupted nature, was not only a sign of his own strength, but also a sign of God's favor on him. He was the beloved servant through whom creation would be renewed. Noah had gotten used to the quiet of the nights. He could feel that something big was about to happen, something that would change the way the earth moves. The world around him looked almost nothing like it used to. There was violence in the streets, injustice in every home, and the cries of the oppressed had reached the heavens. Noah, who had been walking in faith for a long time, heard the voice of the Creator more clearly than ever during all of this. It wasn't just a soft word of comfort. It was a heavy, urgent command from God that judgment was coming quickly. People told Noah things that other people couldn't see. The Creator said that the earth's corruption had reached its peak, and that the evil of mankind had spread so far and so deeply that it could no longer be tolerated. The giants had destroyed the land, blood had stained the soil, and people had turned to violence and sin. It was no longer time to be patient. A flood was coming, a cleansing so vast that it would wash away the stain of rebellion. Yet, amid this promise of judgment, Noah was given a task of mercy. He was chosen not only to be spared, but to prepare a vessel of salvation, a refuge for life itself. The instructions came with clarity, detailed and precise. Noah was commanded to build a great ark, a structure unlike anything seen before. It was not a boat for short journeys, nor a vessel for fishing. It was to be a floating sanctuary capable of carrying not only his family, but pairs of animals from every species. The command carried with it the weight of impossibility. Noah had never seen a flood of this kind. The very idea was beyond imagination, yet he did not doubt the word of the Creator. His role was not to question, but to obey, and his obedience would become the foundation for a future world. Noah began gathering wood, cutting down trees, and shaping the beams that would form the body of the ark. Each strike of his tool was a declaration of faith, for he worked not on the basis of what he saw, but on what he had been told. The sun rose and set, days turned into weeks, and still Noah labored. The size of the ark was immense, its length, breadth, and height carefully dictated. It would be vast enough to hold creatures of every kind, strong enough to withstand the storm that was coming, and sealed with pitch so that not even the greatest waves could break through. As Noah worked, the people around him watched. At first, perhaps, they were curious, wondering why this man was devoting his life to such a strange task. But curiosity soon turned into mockery. They laughed at the very idea of a flood. The sky was clear, the rivers flowed as they always had, and no sign of disaster appeared on the horizon. To them, Noah was nothing more than a fool building a monstrous structure in the middle of dry land. They ridiculed his faith, pointed at his labor, and used him as the subject of their jokes. The mockery became relentless. Children laughed as they passed by, men shouted insults from a distance, women whispered about his madness. Noah bore it all silently, knowing that the Creator's word was greater than the voice of the crowd. Still, the sting of isolation was real. To live in righteousness had always set him apart, but now his obedience made him an object of scorn. Yet, day after day, he continued. With each plank placed upon another, with each nail driven into wood, he was not merely building a vessel, he was building a testimony of faith in action. The ark slowly rose from the ground, its enormous frame a sight that no one could ignore. It was as though the Creator's warning was embodied in wood and pitch, standing tall before a mocking world. Every passerby kuti. LD see the evidence of Noah's belief. But instead of awakening fear or repentance, it only fueled their laughter. They could not comprehend that the same hands shaping beams were preparing the only path of survival. Their blindness was not due to lack of signs, but to hardened hearts unwilling to listen. Noah, though grieved by their mockery, remained steadfast. He knew that his task was not to convince, but to obey. The Creator had warned him, and that warning was enough. His faith did not rest on the approval of his neighbors, but on the certainty of God's voice. His family, though surrounded by scorn, stood with him. His sons learned the rhythm of cutting, shaping, and lifting. His wife carried the quiet strength of support, enduring the shame cast upon them by society. Together they worked, united by the conviction that what Noah had heard was true. The years stretched on, for the ark was not built in haste. It rose beam by beam, a monument to patience as much as to faith. Every day that passed without rain became another reason for the people to laugh. Yet for Noah, it was another opportunity to prepare. The delay was not evidence of God's absence, but of his mercy, giving mankind time to turn back, though they refused. Each insult hurled at Noah became another proof of the world's corruption, confirming why judgment had to come. In the midst of this, Noah's heart must have carried both hope and sorrow. Hope because he knew the Creator's promise of salvation would be fulfilled. Sorrow because he saw his neighbors, his fellow men and women, choosing disbelief even when the evidence of warning stood so plainly before them. The ark was not only a structure of wood, it was a symbol of God's patience, waiting for repentance. Yet the people wasted their days in laughter and continued their lives of violence and corruption. Noah pressed on, never losing sight of the weight of his calling. Each step of the process was guided by divine instruction. The dimensions were exact, the compartments carefully arranged, the layers sealed so no water could penetrate. Nothing was left to chance. Everything was shaped by the Creator's design. Noah's obedience was complete, not half-hearted. He did not cut corners or delay his work, for he knew this was no ordinary project. It was life itself being preserved within the wooden walls of the ark. The world around him grew darker, but Noah's hands did not stop. The sound of tools striking wood echoed across the land, a steady rhythm that proclaimed faith amid unbelief. The ark became a landmark of warning, a message no one could miss. Yet still, laughter filled the air more than repentance. Noah endured, for his strength did not come from their approval, but from the voice that had first warned him. He carried in his heart the certainty that when the skies finally broke open, his obedience would be the difference between life and death. The people saw madness in Noah's labor, but heaven saw devotion. The world saw a foolish man wasting his life, but the Creator saw his faithful servant preparing the vessel through which his covenant would endure. Though the ground was dry, Noah worked as if the waves were already rising, as if the storm was already at the door. His faith looked forward, trusting in what was unseen. While others scoffed, he prepared. While others mocked, he built. And as the massive ark neared completion, it stood not only as wood and pitch, but as a silent testimony that the Word of God never fails. Under the weight of an age already scarred by violence and corruption, the figure of Noah stood as a beacon of quiet faithfulness. But such light always draws hostility from the shadows, and Noah's very presence became a target for both men and giants. The Nephilim, towering and filled with arrogance, regarded him as an obstacle to their dominion. His refusal to bow to their ways and his rejection of the violent systems they had built placed him squarely in opposition to their rule. They mocked his righteousness, but their mockery soon sharpened into hatred. What began as jeering in marketplaces and murmurs of ridicule evolved into open hostility, as though Noah's simple obedience to God was an unspoken condemnation of all their deeds. To a people reveling in violence, corruption, and lawlessness, his presence was a mirror they did not wish to face. The humans who had fallen under the sway of the Watcher's teachings and the Nephilim's dominance also turned their scorn toward him. Many had long abandoned the purity of their forefathers, indulging instead in practices of bloodshed, idolatry, and the pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Noah's refusal to join in their festivals, their battles, and their ways of corruption made him stand apart. To them he seemed strange, a man who resisted the tide that swept the whole world into ruin. This strangeness was intolerable, and so his voice when he spoke warnings became to them not a call to repentance, but an offense. In time, both giants and men came to see him as their adversary, the one figure who did not bend, the one life that silently testified that their ways were destructive. The Nephilim were not merely large in stature, but terrifying in appetite and cruelty. Their hunger for dominance extended beyond food. It was a hunger for control, for the bending of human will beneath their power. When Noah stood unyielding, their rage grew. Stories spread that they approached him with threats, that they ridiculed his building of a vessel on dry ground, and that they conspired to halt his work. Yet Noah continued. Each swing of his hammer, each plank added to the rising frame of the ark, was an act of defiance against their corruption. The sight of this vessel growing day by day in the open fields was a reminder to all who passed that a judgment was coming. It was a silent sermon carved not in words, but in wood, one that both men and giants found unbearable. Violence in those days had reached such proportions that human life seemed worthless. Blood spilled without reason, wars erupted over pride and arrogance, and the cries of the innocent rose from the earth. In the midst of this, Noah's refusal to take part was like a wound to their collective pride. Why would one man resist what all others accepted? Why would one man claim that another way was possible when violence had become the very language of the world? The Nephilim in particular saw him as a threat not because he wielded weapons or armies, but because he carried something far more dangerous: favor with the Most High. They knew that their rebellion had distanced them from the Creator, and Noah's closeness to God was a reminder of the gulf that separated them from what they had once been. Among the people, whispers began to spread that Noah's presence invited misfortune. Superstitions grew, blaming him for droughts, for storms, for the collapse of harvests. They reasoned that his refusal to worship the spirits and idols of the land had angered the unseen powers. They cursed his name in their bar gatherings, and when he warned them of the coming judgment, they laughed all the louder. To the Nephilim, these warnings were insolence. They considered themselves untouchable, born of both heaven and earth, beings too mighty for destruction. For Noah to declare that they too would fall was an insult they could not ignore. Thus, enmity grew. The Nephilim began to plot openly against him. It is told in traditions that they attempted to intimidate him, to frighten him into silence. They wanted to halt the ark's construction, perhaps even to end his life. Yet each attempt was met with divine protection. The same God who had chosen Noah shielded him from their schemes. Still, the hostility deepened. Where once they jeered at the sight of wooden beams rising against the sky, now they looked on with anger and unease. For though they mocked, they also feared. Somewhere deep in their hearts, the truth of Noah's words gnawed at them. The thought that their reign of terror could end, that their towering forms could be brought down, haunted them even as they laughed. The oppression in the land, meanwhile, grew heavier with every passing day. Men who had aligned themselves with the giants carried out their will, acting as enforcers among their own people. Bloodshed became a sport. Cities became places of chaos where might determined right, and the weak had no refuge. Families lived in fear, unsure if tomorrow would bring safety or slaughter. In the fields, crops were trampled under the feet of those who took without care. In the towns, voices of the poor were silenced by the roar of those in power. Amid this darkness, Noah continued to work quietly, plank by plank, a symbol of endurance in a world unraveling. It was not just his work that infuriated them, but his very peace. While others schemed and fought, Noah carried a calmness that could not be shaken. His obedience to God created a stability they could not comprehend. To the Nephilim, whose strength and pride were bound to destruction, this serenity was unsettling. They lived for conquest, for domination, for excess. To see one man unshaken by their threats, unbending before their size and fury, was an affront to their power. The hatred they bore him grew sharper, not only because he warned of coming judgment, but because he showed them that they could not bend every will to their command. The people, too, despised his persistence. When rains failed, they blamed him. When storms gathered, they laughed at his ark as though it were a fool's project. When he spoke of a deluge that would sweep the world, they turned his words into songs of mockery sung at their feasts. But deep down, unease stirred. They saw the conviction in his eyes, the steadfast way his hands worked, the strange protection that seemed always to guard him. They could not admit it aloud, but part of them wondered if he might be right. This unspoken fear only fueled their anger, for if Noah was right, then they were condemned. Thus, hostility toward Noah became one of the clearest signs of the world's corruption. A man of peace became the enemy of giants. A man of righteousness became the target of mockery from his own people. His very existence exposed the decay of a society that hated the truth. The Nephilim, in all their might, turned their hatred toward him. The people, lost in their own corruption, joined the chorus of scorn. And yet, amid it all, Noah endured. His steadfastness became a quiet act of resistance, his ark a silent testimony, his life a light that continued to shine, even as the darkness around him reached its full measure. The time had come when the warnings Noah had been giving for so long finally came true in front of a generation that had chosen to ignore them. The skies, which had been calm and predictable, turned dark in a way that made even the strongest hearts uneasy. The clouds got thicker than they had ever been before, and they cast a dark shadow over the land. It felt like the air was getting thicker, as if creation was holding its breath. People who had laughed at Noah's words now felt a strange sense of unease growing inside them. At first, they thought the clouds were just another storm, like any other, but the clouds didn't go away. Instead, the sky opened up and the first drops of rain fell. At first it seemed harmless, but it was the start of something bigger, the first strokes of a judgment that could not be stopped. The ground soaked up the first rain, and for a while people still made fun of it. They told each other that it was just the weather, but the rain kept coming. It got heavier, pouring down in streams instead of drops and pounding the ground in a steady beat. Streams became rivers, rivers overflowed their banks, and fields that were low became shallow lakes. The pounding water made the ground softer, and roads that used to be busy with travelers were hidden by muddy floods. Farmers watched in horror as the rain kept falling and flattened their crops. Animals became agitated because they instinctively feared what was coming. Some people still laughed nervously, telling themselves that this flood would soon be over. But it didn't go away. It got worse. The rain didn't let up as the hours turned into days. Water flowed through the valleys and slowly climbed the hillsides. The first homes to be taken were those that were too close to rivers. The currents took wood and stone away, pulling things and memories into the rising waters. Families ran to higher ground, screaming in fear and holding on to each other. The earlier arrogance was replaced by panic. They had made fun of Noah's warnings for years, but now the ark, standing tall on its dry foundation, didn't look like the work of a crazy person anymore. It was a dark reminder that maybe everything he had said was true. Many people ran toward it, but the door was closed and sealed by God's own hand. No amount of pleading could get it to open. At first, the Nephilim, who were much taller than the people, laughed at the panic. They walked right into the water, using their huge size to move through the flood like it was nothing. But even they started to see that this was different from anything else they had seen. The water kept rising, swallowing trees, drowning animals, and rushing into places that were thought to be safe. The tide was too strong for them to stop. Their arrogance faded as they realized they were stuck on shrinking islands of land, roaring in defiance but powerless against the weight of the waters. The people cried out, their voices rising in desperation to the heavens they had long ignored. Families huddled together, crying as they saw the water rise around them. Mothers held on to their kids, fathers yelled for help, and whole communities ran to get to higher ground. Some people tried to hold on to the sides of mountains, while others sought safety in towers or strongholds. But the waters didn't care. They got higher and higher, devouring everything in their path. What started out as interest in the rain turned into fear, then full-blown terror. The land that had once seemed so safe now let them down, leaving them with no way to escape the flood. The Ark was the only safe place, a silent reminder of years of warnings. As the water lifted it, its huge shape floated steadily, carrying Noah, his family, and the animals he had been given. People outside could see it rising, but they couldn't touch it. Many people knocked on its sides, begging to be let in, but the door was locked. The cries that rose around it were full of desperation, pleas, promises, and frantic prayers that came too late. The people who had made fun of Noah were now holding on to hope that his God would hear them, but the flood was already upon them. The rain kept falling without stopping, and the deep fountains also broke free. Water rose up from below the ground and joined the torrents that fell from above. It looked like the earth was splitting open, letting out hidden reservoirs that had been held back for a long time. The waters from heaven and earth came together in a terrible way. The waves made hills that used to look tall look small. The rolling flood wiped out villages, fields, and cities. The roads and borders vanished, and the world looked like it was just a lot of water that went on forever. As they got tired, the people's cries got weaker. Some people tried to stay alive by making rafts out of fallen trees and tying wood together in a hurry. Others climbed to the tops of mountains, but the water kept rising after them, never stopping. The giants, who were very strong, started to lose hope as they saw the water rise higher and higher. Their angry roars turned into scared cries. What they thought was unbreakable was falling apart right in front of them. Nothing mattered about their size, power, or rule when the judgment came down. The other survivors panicked quickly. Neighbors fought each other for the smallest chance of survival. People pushed each other off of high places, desperate to find a place to stand above the rising waters. But the waters didn't leave any room for mercy. It didn't matter if someone was strong or weak, rich or poor, a king or a servant. They all got eaten. The flood brought everyone down a notch, breaking every boastful heart and silencing every mocking tongue. Noah and his family were inside the ark when the storm hit. As the storm raged, they heard the rain pounding on the roof, the waves crashing against the sides, and the faint, desperate cries outside as voices rose and fell. But there was peace inside the ark because God had locked them in. There was safety inside, but outside was a mess. There was a big difference between the outside and the inside. Outside was despair and judgment, and inside was safety and life. People had made fun of Noah for being obedient for a long time, but now it was the way to salvation. The world's rebellion brought only destruction. It rained every day. The people who used to brag about their strength and make fun of Noah's warnings were no longer there. The Nephilim, who used to scare people on earth, were quieted by the water. The land became a vast sea, and everyone who had put their faith in their own strength was swept away. The laughter that used to fill the air at Noah's expense was replaced by silence, which was only broken by the sound of rushing water and the ark's groan as it rose on the waves. The flood couldn't be stopped. It was a judgment that showed how weak human pride is and how pointless it is to rebel. People who used to think Noah was stupid now wanted to learn from him. People who used to make fun of his ark now wanted to stay in it. But the time for them to change their minds was over. The first drops of rain kissed seeds. Here the sign, the start of a divine order that could not be changed. As the waters rose higher and higher, the world as it had been was washed away. The ark and its passengers were the only things left to show God's mercy in the midst of his judgment. The waters didn't stop. What started as a lot of rain and rising rivers turned into a flood that covered the whole land. People who had once stood firm on solid ground were now scrambling for any high ground, desperately holding onto rocks and trees, but even these were soon swallowed up. The steady rain from the sky and the violent waves from the depths below combined to make the flood bigger than anyone could have imagined. The hills were the first to go, and their slopes turned into islands that got smaller and smaller. The waves rose and swallowed up villages that were on ridges. As the water rose higher, even mountains that had been there for generations began to disappear. Their peaks were barely visible before the flood took them away. The world that used to have homes, cities, and fields was now under an endless ocean, a world washed clean by the waters of judgment. The cries of the people echoed across the water, but no one answered. Families huddled together and climbed higher and higher, only to find the waves chasing them. Parents tried to lift their kids above the rising flood by putting them on their shoulders, but the kids cried. Rafts that were quickly made fell apart because of the strong current. The strong tried to swim, their arms flailing in desperation, but the water pulled them down and they got too tired to keep going. The laughter and arrogance of the past were gone, replaced by pure fear. The roar of the rushing waters drowned out every cry for mercy. At first, the Nephilim, who were much taller than normal men, laughed at the flood. Their height gave them an edge, and they confidently stepped into the water, raising their huge bodies above the rising tide. People around them thought they were invincible because they held their heads high and roared defiantly at the sky. But even their size couldn't stop what was happening. As the water rose, they had to go higher and higher, and their long strides got shorter and shorter as the ground beneath them disappeared. Their roars of mockery turned into screams of anger and then screams of fear. They hit the water with their fists, as if their strength could stop the judgment that was coming down on them, but the water would not give in. Some Nephilim tried to climb mountains by pulling themselves up with their huge arms and holding on to cliffs while the water lapped at their feet. They yelled at each other to keep going as they climbed higher, but even the tallest peaks couldn't save them. The water from the flood rose above their knees, then their chests, and finally their shoulders. Some people tried to swim, kicking and thrashing with all their might, but their big bodies were too heavy, and the currents pulled them down. They stopped roaring one by one, and the sound of waves closing over them took their place. The beings that used to scare the world and rule men with iron fists were now helpless in the face of the flood. The people who had once asked the giants for help now saw how useless it was. They used to look to the Nephilim for strength, but now they watched them fall. Families held on to the legs of giants, thinking their size would protect them, but the waters rose higher and higher and swept them away. The Nephilim, who had eaten men, now drowned with them. The waters didn't get tired, and they kept rising higher and higher without stopping. Their strength didn't matter. They died in as much fear as the people they used to rule. The mountains, which had been there for a long time and were strong, were now the last hope for those who were still alive. People crowded onto the ridges, climbing over each other to get to the top. There were desperate screams, bodies fighting for space, and the sound of rain that wouldn't stop at those heights. But even these mountains, which used to touch the clouds, were eaten. The highest peaks sank beneath the waves, leaving no place to hide or hold on to. The world used to be full of valleys, forests, and plains, but now it was just a sea with no end in sight except for the ark that floated above it all. Noah and his family could feel the waters rocking as the ark rose. The rain was so loud that it was hard to hear, but the ark stayed still. They could see the huge body of water getting bigger and bigger through the windows. They could see the mountains getting smaller, the Nephilim fighting for their lives, and the people screaming. But the doors stayed shut, and the cries outside faded one by one as the flood took them. The ark was the only thing that was safe from the destruction. It was carried gently on the same waters that destroyed everything else. The water got so high that it covered up everything that could be seen. The endless flood wiped out what had been the pride of kings, the fields of labor, the strongholds of armies, and the temples of false gods. The world lost its pride and defiance. As the drowning people got tired, the cries turned into silence. The only thing left was the sound of rain falling on the water with unending force. The giants who used to brag about how strong they were now lie still under the flood, their bodies sinking deeper and deeper. Their voices, which had once been scary, were forever quieted. The people were also gone, swept away in huge numbers. Their cities and homes were swept away, and the waves washed away their names. Noah and his family were the only ones left, and they survived because they obeyed. The flood did what it was supposed to do: get rid of the evil, violent, and rebellious beings that had been on earth. The waters rose above the tallest mountains, covering them by many cubits. The earth that used to be full of life was now a vast ocean. Seeing the drowned Nephilim under the waves was a haunting reminder of how quickly power goes away. Their huge bodies, now dead, floated down into the deep, where they were lost in silence. They used to think of themselves as gods among men, unbeatable and eternal. But the flood showed that they were mortal and couldn't stand the judgment that was passed on them. The people who thought they were invincible were the first to fall, and the waters didn't care how big or strong they were. The Ark was the only ship in this huge sea. It was the last ship of life in a world that had been washed clean. Noah, his family, and the animals in the Ark were all that was left of the order of creation. The waters stretched on and on beyond the wooden walls, taking with them everything that had been. There was nothing that could compare to the flood. It had eaten the giants, destroyed the cities, and even the tallest mountains had sunk. The world below was gone, and a new chapter was about to begin, safe inside the ark that floated on the endless waves. It was hard to believe how calm it was inside the ark compared to how crazy it was outside. The sound of rain hitting the wooden hull was constant, like drums echoing through the sky. But inside those walls, there was a fragile peace. Noah and his family moved quietly with soft voices and steady steps, as if they knew how important this moment was. There were all kinds of creatures around them, resting in pairs. Their eyes showed both the confusion of being trapped and the calm of being spared. Lions lay next to their mates, their golden eyes shining in the dark. Birds sat quietly with their wings folded, waiting for a sky they could no longer see. The ark was full of life, with the sounds of cows, horses, and goats all mixing together to make a rhythm of survival. The smell inside was strong, a mix of damp wood, straw, and animal musk, but it also had a strange sense of comfort. This ark was more than just wood and nails for Noah and his family. It was a safe place. The creaking of the boards reminded them that they were on the water, above the judgment that was going on outside. The timbers groaned as the water pushed against them, but the ark stayed strong, like a fortress against the flood. It seemed like the sky had broken open and the rain fell without stopping. Lightning flashed in the distance, lighting up the endless waters for a moment. Thunder rolled across the sky like the voice of judgment itself. Noah's sons would stop what they were doing from time to time to look at the sealed door and listen to the storm that was battering them. But Noah's calm presence steadied their hearts. He walked among them with a calm and confident look on his face, reminding them that faith had brought them this far and would continue to do so. His wife and daughters-in-law kept busy taking care of the animals by giving them food, changing their straw beds, and calming them down when the thunder got too loud. The ark was carefully set up so that each pair of animals had its own space. The big elephants stood next to each other, swaying gently with the ship's movement. Their trunks would curl around each other from time to time, as if to comfort each other. The oxen chewed slowly, and their eyes were heavy with sleep. The sheep huddled together, and their soft bleats filled the quiet between the thunder. Birds sometimes fluttered around, their wings hitting the wooden stalls before they calmed down again. The animals that are usually known for being fierce seemed calm, as if the weight of what was going on outside had calmed them down for a while. Noah's sons often looked at the animals in pairs and were amazed by what they saw. It was hard to believe that the lion was lying still next to the ox and the wolf was lying still next to the lamb. It was like the ark was a world where peace had to be forced on everyone, even if it was only for a short time. There were no hunts, no screams of fear between predator and prey, just the quiet of survival. The ark was built so that each creature would be safe, and they were brought there by order, not by chance. That knowledge made even the family feel awe. They were living in a miracle, surrounded by the breath of life that God had preserved. The world was drowning outside. The rain was worse than any storm men had ever seen. It came down in sheets, like rivers pouring out of the sky. The ground groaned under it, and springs burst forth from the ground, joining the flood from above. Waves that went on forever covered what had once been fertile fields. The cries of people had already faded away, drowned out by the storm's roar and the waters that kept rising. There was only silence left, broken only by the rain that wouldn't stop falling and the sky that was crying. The picture of the flood was scary, but being inside the ark made me feel like I was alone. Noah's family knew what was going on, but they were not part of it, like they were looking through a veil. They were sad about what they had lost, but they also knew that they had been chosen to carry on the seed of life. The ark was more than just a boat. It was a womb that held the future of the world inside its wooden walls. Every heartbeat, whether it was from a person or an animal, was a sign that life would go on. The days ran together, with only the sound of rain and the faint light that came through the small window above them to tell them apart. At times, the family whispered to each other, remembering the life they had left behind, the fields they used to work, the trees that used to bear fruit, and the voices of their neighbors that were now quiet. But even though they were sad, they were thankful. Every time they looked at each other, they were reminded that they were still together, supported by a mercy that was bigger than them. When the world was dark, and only the storm could be heard, the ark felt like a fragile cradle floating across an endless sea. The family would lie close together and pray, their voices rising above the sounds of the animals settling down. The smell of rain and wood filled the air, but the ark's steady rocking put them to sleep. They might have seen bits and pieces of the world they used to know in their dreams, but when they woke up, they were always back in the quiet safety of their wooden home. The animals also seemed to know that something was wrong. There would be a low rumble from an elephant or the deep growl of a lion in the dark sometimes when it was quiet. But there was no fear. These sounds were not aggressive, but rather reminders that they were also waiting, enduring, and surviving. Every now and then, birds would sing softly, filling the air with notes that sounded like songs of mourning. It seemed like everyone on the ark, both people and animals, were all waiting in the same serious way. The flood kept going outside, without stopping. The sky poured itself out, and the earth cried from deep within. Together, they made a judgment that was fair to all. No cave was too deep, and no mountain was too high to stop it. The world that used to be full of life was now quiet, hidden beneath waters that seemed to go on forever. It looked like the earth was gone from the ark, and there was only a sea with no end in sight. But there was life inside. The pairs of animals and the family that was bound together by obedience all spoke of something that would come after the storm. Noah would sometimes stop what he was doing and stand in the middle of the ark to listen to the sounds of breathing, the soft rustling of straw, and the occasional animal cry. Every sound made him think of how big the job was that he had been given. He was holding the pulse of creation itself, kept safe through judgment, and waiting for the day when the waters would fall and the earth would be seen again. The ark drifted, and its wooden frame groaned under the weight of its job, but never broke. The rain fell from the sky like tears that would never stop, and the earth let out its sadness. The heavens wept and the land groaned, But inside, the ark was the steady beat of life, a fragile piece floating on an ocean of judgment. The storm raged on, but the ark stayed put, carrying both people and animals through the dark. It was a place of peace in a world that was falling apart. The storm that had once raged with unending fury finally started to calm down. After days and days of heavy rain and the deep groaning, the first signs of change could be felt inside the ark. As if the heavens were holding back their tears, the sound of water hitting the wooden hull grew quieter and less violent. Noah's family listened closely and noticed that the waves that had been so angry before were now rocking the ark more gently, like a giant breathing in and out as it fell asleep. It was the start of something new, but none of them knew how long it would be before they could walk on the ground again. Noah watched as the sky changed from the small window high up. The thick, black clouds that had been there for so long started to break up, letting in faint rays of light that touched the endless waters. It was a beautiful and scary sight. The world as it was is now gone, buried under the flood. The cities, fields, forests, and voices that used to fill the air were all gone. But the soft rays of sunlight held a quiet promise. They talked about a time when the earth would be clean again and ready for life to begin again. The water started to go down, but it took a long time. It wasn't like a basin suddenly draining. It was more like the earth slowly and steadily pulling back, as if it were carefully letting out its breath. Noah and his family could feel the ark move a little. It wasn't rising higher with each day's storm anymore. Instead, it was sinking as the water below it started to sink. At times, the animals got restless because they could feel the change. The doves cooed more often, and their feathers ruffled as if they were ready to fly. The bigger animals walked around in their stalls, sniffing the air and picking up faint smells of dirt and plants that were buried deep down. Even though they couldn't see land, creation seemed to know that the waters were falling. Then, with a heavy groan, the ark came to rest. It hit something solid on the bottom, and for the first time in a long time, they weren't lost anymore. They had settled down on the sides of faraway mountains. They couldn't go outside yet, but knowing that solid ground was below them made them feel better. They weren't wandering over an endless ocean anymore. They were waiting for a place that had been chosen by God. Noah whispered prayers of thanks with his forehead against the wooden planks. His voice shook with awe. The waiting went on, though. The waters took their time going back, as if they didn't want to let the earth go. Noah knew they couldn't hurry. If they stepped out too soon, they would only find mud and death. But if they waited, they would find solid ground. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Noah let a raven fly free, and everyone watched through the window as it flew over the water. It flew around in circles across the sky, but it didn't come back to them because it couldn't find a place to land. Even though their hearts were heavy, Noah's faith did not waver. He let a dove go later. Its wings took it up into the pale sky, and they waited for hours, straining their ears to hear it come back. Finally, it came back, its wings tired and looking for a place to land. Noah gently put it back in the ark. The family sighed, their hopes fading, but they kept going. Noah let the dove go again after 7 days. This time, it came back with a small but amazing thing in its beak, a freshly picked olive leaf. Noah's heart swelled with tears when he saw it. It was a sign that life was starting to move again, that trees had lived through the flood, and that the earth was breathing again under the water. He showed it to his family, and they all marveled at the little branch, which was a promise written in green. After that, hope grew in the ark. The animals moved around more, and their eyes lit up as if they could feel the change too. Noah waited again before sending the dove out again. This time, it didn't come back. It had found a place to sleep, maybe a nest in the new branches of trees that grew above the waterline. Noah and his family knew that the time was coming soon. Soon they would leave their wooden shelter and enter a world that was no longer flooded. Finally, the water went down enough for the tops of the mountains to be seen. Their rocky crowns stuck out of the flood's surface, shining with water but staying still and strong. As the days went by, valleys started to show up, rivers started to form, and the slopes started to come to life with new plants. The ark sat quietly among them, as if it were waiting for permission to let go of its cargo of people and animals. Noah listened for the word, knowing that it was the Creator's timing that mattered most, not his own. Then, the order came. When Noah opened the ark's big door, light flooded in. The animals moved around a lot, and their cries made a chorus of sounds that filled the air with life. They stepped out onto the fresh earth one by one, in pairs like they had come in. Their hooves and paws touched the ground, which was still wet but strong. Birds flew up into the sky, their wings and songs filling the air with joy. The lions roared, the cows lowed, and the sheep bleated. Each voice was a sign that life had returned to creation. Noah and his family slowly stepped outside, their feet sinking into the soft ground. The smell of fresh dirt and clean air filled their lungs. They looked around at the new world, which was clean, quiet, and empty, but full of potential. The silence was thick, with only the sounds of animals and the wind softly whispering across the mountains, breaking it. It was a quiet time before life began again. The family looked at each other with wide eyes. They had been spared by judgment and safely carried across waters that had taken everything else. They were now at the beginning of a new age, ready to start over. Every breath felt like a gift, and every step on the ground felt like a blessing. The earth itself seemed to sigh, welcoming them and offering itself again to be filled with the life that had been kept safe inside the ark. The animals ran away from them, some staying close and others going into the hills and valleys. Birds made nests in new branches and sang songs that filled the quiet air. The sun shone warmly on the land, and its rays sparkled on the wet ground as if they were sealing the promise of a new beginning. As streams began to flow down the sides of the mountains, they carved paths through the earth. At the same time, delicate green shoots pushed their way up, breaking through the soil with fragile determination. Noah's family thought the world was both strange and familiar. They remembered the land that used to be there, the fields and gardens, the sound of their neighbors laughing, and the life that used to fill the air. But they also knew that this was not the same earth. This was a world that had been reborn and given back in mercy. It was a blank canvas, waiting for hands and feet to touch it, and generations to come. They stood in reverent silence, taking deep breaths of the air that felt like the first breath of life itself. The ark, which was now behind them, looked like a statue. It had been their home, their safe place, and their lifeline during the storm. But it had done what it was meant to do. Now it would sit on the side of the mountain, getting worn down by the sun and wind. It would be a quiet reminder of the flood and the faith that had helped them get through it. Noah put his hand on the wooden frame one last time and said a prayer of thanks before turning to look out at the wide horizon in front of him. The start of everything lay before them. The waters had gone back, the sky was clear, and the earth was ready to be filled again. Life had come back, and with it came the weight of hope. Life is fragile, but strong. Noah's family stood on the wet ground of a new world and knew that from then on, every seed, breath, and heartbeat would hold the promise of a new beginning. They were chosen to walk on the earth, care for it, and watch it grow again under the watchful eyes of the heavens. When Noah and his family and the animals got out of the ark, the air felt fresh and alive in a way that words couldn't quite capture. There was a heavy silence in the world that had been washed clean, but in that silence was a sense of peace that wrapped itself around every heart. The ground was still wet from the water that had just left, and it felt soft under their feet. The sky above was clear of storm clouds and a pale blue canvas of promise. Noah stood still for a long time, looking out over the land that lay before him. It was a land that had been reborn from chaos and judgment. His heart bowed in thankfulness and humility because of everything that had happened. Every breath felt like a gift, and every ray of sunlight felt like a reminder of mercy. Noah's first instinct was not to build, explore, or even gather what he might need to survive. It was to say, "Thank you." He knew that God had saved him and his family not because they were strong or wise, but because God had chosen them. He knew that many voices had been silenced in the flood, that the Nephilim had drowned, and that corruption had been washed away. But here he was, alive, chosen, and breathing. He couldn't help but say thank you. He looked up at the sky without thinking and started to think about what he needed to do first. Build an altar, a place to give thanks. Noah picked up rocks and dirt and carefully arranged them. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing with fear. He felt like he was giving up his soul every time he set a stone, as if he were acknowledging what had been done. His family stood around him and watched in silence, knowing that this was not a normal act of devotion. It was the first altar built in a new world, the first act of worship in a new creation. The animals moved around, some eating the new grass shoots and others drinking from small pools of water that the flood left behind. But in the middle of this peaceful place, Noah's altar rose, a sign of thanks carved out of the ground itself. Noah brought out clean animals and birds from the ark when the altar was ready. These were the animals and birds that had been kept for this holy purpose. He got them ready as gifts, not quickly but with great care. The fire was lit and the smoke rose into the sky, taking with it the smell of sacrifice. The smell spread through the air and reached the sky as a sign of Noah's worship and surrender. It was more than just a ritual. It was a statement that faith still existed, even though the flood had destroyed the old world. When people first stepped onto the new earth, they worshiped their Creator. As the smoke rose higher, Noah's heart filled with thanks. He was thankful for the life that had been spared, the safety of his family, the animals that had been saved, and the new beginning that lay ahead of him. His voice was soft but steady as he prayed for humility. He understood that God's judgment was fair, that the corruption was too much to bear, and that God's mercy had saved him through it all. It was a prayer full of tears and respect, a cry that came not just from ritual, but from the depths of survival, from someone who had been through judgment and come out the other side. God liked Noah's sacrifice. He was happy with the smoke that rose up, which smelled like burnt offering. It came from a heart of thanks and obedience. At that moment, God made a promise, a covenant that had never been made before. He promised never again to curse the ground because of people, and never again to flood the earth and kill all life, even though people were still evil from a young age. It wasn't a denial of how weak people are. It was a choice by God to show mercy and hold off on judgment in a new way. The flood had washed away the sins, but now grace would keep them safe. To make this agreement official, God put a sign in the sky. The clouds that had been pouring rain nonstop now parted, and a rainbow of colors stretched across the pale sky, shining in the sun. It stretched from one side of the horizon to the other, shining brightly against the clear sky. Noah and his family had never seen anything like it before. The rainbow sparkled like a painting of light, soft but strong, a message written into the very fabric of the sky. Noah and his family were amazed by it. They knew this light wasn't normal. It was a promise, a sign that would last for generations. This bow would show up every time it rained or clouds formed, reminding the earth of God's promise. It was a connection between heaven and earth, between the Creator and the creation, saying that the waters would never rise again to kill all life. The rainbow was a crown of hope that stretched across the earth like a crown of mercy. The family stood together under its light, moved by how beautiful it was. The kids looked on with wide eyes, their young faces glowing with wonder, as if the sky had opened up to show them a secret of beauty. The women whispered softly, their voices full of respect. Noah stood still, tears streaming down his face, knowing he was witnessing a moment that would last forever. The rainbow was a promise not just to him, but to everyone who would come after him. It was a promise that was sealed not with stone tablets or words carved into rock, but with light itself, which hung across the sky where no hand could erase it. They would never forget every little thing about that moment. The smell of the offering was still in the air, mixing with the smell of wet earth. The altar was a sign of faith, and above it was the bright bough of promise. It was like heaven and earth had agreed to hold hands and make a pact of mercy. Noah's goal wasn't just to stay alive, it was also to trust. He had faith in the order to build an ark, the promise of salvation, and now he had faith in the peace treaty written in the sky. As the sun moved across the sky, it made the rainbow shine brighter and brighter on the shiny earth. The leaves and grass still had drops of water on them, which reflected the colors in millions of tiny mirrors and spread the promise across every surface and blade. It was as if all of creation was part of the show, with each part reflecting the beauty of the promise. Noah's family took deep breaths, filling their lungs with fresh air. They felt the sun on their skin and knew that they were living in a world that would always be marked by this covenant. The smoke kept rising from the altar as it burned. Noah looked at his family, the animals grazing nearby, and the land that was clean and fertile. He felt at peace. He knew that the road ahead would be hard, with work, struggle, and the burden of starting over. But he also knew that the promise was still there. A flood would never again wipe out the earth. Judgment would never come like that again. When storms came, the rainbow would remind them of their hope and keep them grounded. The colors stayed as the day went on, lighting up the sky with their beauty. The covenant wasn't just words spoken or a vision for Noah's family. It was a sign that would last for all time for everyone who walked the earth. The rainbow would still be there long after Noah, his children, and their children's children were gone. It would whisper of mercy and promise that would last. It was the way the Almighty put hope into creation itself, a silent voice that would speak whenever people looked up after it rained. That gave Noah peace of mind. He had prayed, made a sacrifice, and seen a promise that would last longer than he would. The altar was his proof, and the rainbow was God's. And in that holy moment, with the colors of the sky stretching out in all directions, Noah felt completely thankful. He had survived the flood, and now he stood at the beginning of a world bound forever to mercy by the bow of light painted across the sky. The Almighty's order had already been given, and the powerful beings who used to walk the earth with confidence were now pulled into a place where no light could reach them. They were not bound by chains made of iron or bronze, but by something deeper, something made by the Creator's own will. They were unbreakable, made of command and judgment, and each link was a reminder of their defiance. Once these angels stood in bright glory, their voices blending with the music of heaven, and their wings carried light. Now, without their home and their freedom, they were thrown into the abyss, which the Bible calls pits of darkness and a prison until the day of judgment. Time didn't move the same way there as it did here on earth. There was no sunrise to mark the passing hours or stars to guide the measure of nights while they were in prison. Only the heavy silence, which was sometimes broken by their own cries of despair. They who had once been amazed by the beauty of the sky now strained their eyes and saw nothing but shadows. The skies that used to be so bright were now so close to them that they felt like they were suffocating, and the memory of light burned them with regret. They were punished not only with chains, but also with memories of what they had lost. Every thought took them back to Mount Hermon, where they had sworn their fateful oath and joined together in rebellion. They remembered how exciting it was to come down to earth, how powerful it felt to share secrets that were not supposed to be shared, and how women looked at them with awe. But those memories, which used to make them feel good about themselves, had turned sour. They couldn't get away from them, and the silence of their prison made the past hurt them more than the chains did. Azazel, who had taught men how to make weapons and women how to dress up, was tied up and buried in the desert place called Dudael. The earth was told to cover him with sharp rocks, which made his prison not only deep but also painful, like sharp teeth pressing against him. The fire from heaven burned all around that place, and the starlight above never got to him. He was alone in his pain, and he had to deal with both physical and spiritual shame because he was seen as the main corrupter of humanity. The Watchers used to speak his name with authority, but now the chained only heard it as a warning. Semjaza, who had been in charge of the group of 200, was crushed by the weight of leadership that had turned to ruin. His once strong voice had turned into a groan of regret. He had convinced his brothers to join him by promising that their oath would keep them from being afraid of being alone and that their bond would make them stronger. But that same bond now held them together in sadness. They blamed him, but they also blamed themselves because they had all made a choice. In the dark of their prison, accusations flew like sparks, but no one could change the fate that the Almighty had sealed. The prison itself seemed to be judging people. The void wasn't empty. It was a place where the weight of God's anger made it breathe. There were no lights, but shadows moved and whispers crawled through the dark, voices that reminded them of the doom that was coming. They couldn't sleep like people do, because they weren't allowed to. They were always aware of what was going on, but they couldn't change it. Their wings, which used to take them across the sky, hung useless at their sides, a reminder of freedom that was gone forever. There was a heaviness there, not just from the chains, but also from being spiritually cut off. Being cut off from the presence of God was the worst pain of all. They had been part of the chorus that sang about creation in heaven, near the throne of light. They thought that when they came down, they could make their own kingdom, teach their own wisdom, and rule over all of humanity. But in jail, they learned how weak they really were. They were strong, but not above judgment. They were powerful, but they weren't eternal without the one who made them. This realization ate away at them like a wound that never healed. And so the years went by in this dark place. The fallen angels were not killed, but they were not free either. They waited, stuck in a holding pattern that only led to the bigger judgment that was still to come. Every whisper from the abyss reminded them that their time would not end here. One day, the final reckoning would call them forth, not to freedom, but to the fire prepared for such rebellion. They were terrified of that fire because they could feel it coming even though they were chained up. But there was also a strange silence among them, because some of them had stopped fighting against their chains. They lay still, their pride broken and their voices quiet. It felt like the weight of judgment had taken away their will. Some people were so angry that they pulled against ties that couldn't be broken. Their screams echoed against the walls of the abyss like thunder in a cave. But everyone knew that the result would be the same, whether they were quiet or angry. They were tied up, kept in the dark, and stripped of their home, waiting for a day that would change everything for them. The world above kept going, often without knowing about the shadows that moved below. But every storm that rolled in and every tremor that shook the ground seemed to tell the story of the deep prison where powerful people used to be free. And even though people couldn't see them, the fallen angels stayed there, trapped in their abyss, as a reminder that no rebellion against the Creator could last without consequences. Their thoughts went around and around in the dark of their chains. They thought about the women who had caught their attention, the laughter of the children born from their unions, and the cries of men who had learned how to use swords. They remembered the giants who had lived on earth, their sons of corruption, and how even they had been swept away by the flood. They had lost everything they had built and everything they had hoped to rule. There was only silence, chains, and the knowledge that they had traded eternity for a brief moment of desire. This was the second part of their punishment, not only being tied up, but also the slow, painful realization of what their rebellion had cost. Every second in that void was a lesson without words, a sermon written not on paper, but on their souls. It was proof that even the most powerful beings could fall, and that God, His justice, would not sleep forever. They stayed there with their wings folded in the dark and their voices lost in the void, waiting for what felt like forever, knowing that the day of final judgment was still to come. Azazel was a unique figure, and his story had become a shadow that stretched across time. People whispered his name in fear because he was not only one of the fallen but also the very embodiment of rebellion. Azazel stood out from the many others who had left their place in heaven. He wasn't just a follower of temptation. He was a leader, a teacher of destruction, and the one who brought forbidden knowledge into the world with such boldness that it seemed like the earth itself was stained by his presence. People in the past didn't think of him as an angel without a name. They thought of him as a force, a ruler of evil, and a leader of enemies of God. His legacy started when he told people things that were never meant for them to know. While others used subtlety to corrupt, Azazel taught openly. He taught men how to make weapons, sharpen iron blades, and make tools for war. He taught women how to use paints, jewels, and other decorations to make themselves look beautiful, but he also taught them how to make themselves look vain. He taught people to be violent, lustful, and proud, and these things spread from one generation to the next. The world was thrown into chaos as whole cities became drunk on violence and excess. This is why Azazel was chosen as the leader when the time came to judge. Azazel yelled when others whispered. Azazel told others what to do. But along with judgment came a sentence. Azazel got a punishment that was worse than most, even though the watchers were tied up. Old texts say that he was thrown into a desert, buried under jagged rocks in the wilderness, and sealed in darkness where no light would touch him until the right day. He was chained up, but not with regular chains. Instead, he was chained up with chains that were meant to keep spirits that had once moved between the stars from moving. People say that the desert wind carried his cries, but the empty space around him swallowed them. He waited there, not asleep, but awake and restless, knowing that his rebellion had not led to death, but to prison until the end of time. This waiting was its own pain. The other people in the dark groaned, but Azazel's pain was worse because he was the leader and felt guilty about it. His name was linked to violence, crime, and the deaths of many people over the years. He felt the weight of many souls on him because he had set the example for others to follow. He was punished not only by the chains that held him down, but also by the knowledge of what he had done. Even so, his spirit was not broken. Azazel still wouldn't back down. When someone else would have given up in despair, he waited with rage, like a caged animal, for the day he would rise again. People who read these stories saw Azazel as a symbol of leadership that led to destruction. He was a reminder that power could change the course of history when used in rebellion. He had been in charge of angels, but when he fell, he became in charge of enemies. Some traditions called him a desert spirit, while others called him a figure whose name was used in rituals of atonement. In these rituals, sins were symbolically cast away on a scapegoat and sent into the wilderness with the mark of Azazel. The picture was powerful. Sins tied to a creature, sent to a desolate place, and carrying the memory of rebellion to the one who embodied it. Many people thought the story of Azazel ended when the floodwaters washed away the dirt. But his chains didn't kill him. They kept him alive for another day. His waiting was connected to the big story of the end, the time when judgment would reach its final point. People didn't forget about him. Azazel was there, but he was quiet and hidden, like a storm building up on the other side of the world. The Bible hints at what he will do in the last battle, when all of God's enemies will rise up for one last fight. He is still a prisoner, a leader without an army, and a general without a battlefield until then. But the memory of his rebellion will make sure that his name is not forgotten when the end comes. People in the ancient world thought of him as the leader of enemies, and his example lived on as a warning. People who saw the rainbow after the flood thought it was a sign of mercy, but the story of Azazel reminded them of justice that never sleeps. He was waiting, trapped in darkness, and every generation that came after him learned from his fall. Chains would always follow the misuse of power. Knowledge that is misused will always lead to disaster. Corrupted leadership would always lead to shame. Azazel, the leader of the fallen, is still waiting for the day when he will be released, not into freedom, but into final judgment. His story is like a shadow over history, a reminder that no rebellion can last forever. The earth may have been cleaned, the ark may have rested, and the covenant may have been sealed with a rainbow, but Azazel is still waiting in the dark. He is a prisoner of his own defiance and a leader who carries the weight of many rebellions on his chained shoulders. His fate is tied to the day when the enemies will rise again, and everyone will see that he was not waiting for salvation but for death. When the floodwaters covered the earth and the giants' bodies sank beneath the waves, their huge frames turned to dust, but their spirits did not rest. The souls of men went back to their Creator, but the children of angels and women were not completely of heaven or earth. Their spirits were restless because they were cast out of both worlds and forced to wander in exile. These were the spirits that didn't have bodies, the dark shapes that moved between worlds but couldn't get into heaven or the grave. People in later generations called them demons, spirits that were free and looking for a place to live among the living. The ancients said that these lost souls clung to the earth and drifted through valleys and ruins like smoke. They were tied to the same ground that once held their strong feet, but now they were formless and restless. They used to roar like conquerors, but now they whisper like seducers. They were so hungry they couldn't eat, so thirsty they couldn't drink, and so angry they couldn't calm down. Not only did they destroy them, but they also made them long for things. They wanted to get into bodies, mess with lives, and corrupt hearts, hoping to taste a little bit of the power they used to have. After the flood, the people who lived began to meet them in small ways. Farmers would hear voices in the wind at night that made them want to hurt people. Shepherds said that shadows moved between their flocks, scaring the animals even though they couldn't see any predators. In their dreams, men and women felt the weight of unseen forces pushing them to do cruel or hopeless things. These were the spirits of the giants, restless and dangerous, who fed on fear and weakness. The spirits of the giants were free to roam, unlike the angels who were stuck in darkness. Their punishment was to wander endlessly, torturing people until the end. Over time, whole cultures started to shape their fears and superstitions around them. Some people called them evil winds, others called them unclean spirits, and still others gave them names and made sacrifices in the hopes of getting rid of them. People blamed them for getting sick without warning, going crazy, and having sudden fits of violence that made friends turn against each other. The demons loved these problems because they could take advantage of people's weaknesses. They whispered revenge where there was anger. They turned lust into fire where it was. They made despair worse until a man wanted to die. They didn't have their own bodies, so they tried to make men's bodies their homes. The stories tell of men who were possessed, whose eyes weren't their own, and whose voices had tones that weren't theirs. Some showed unnatural strength, while others tortured themselves until they went crazy because of the spirits that were bothering them. People in these communities would put chains on these people or send them out into the wilderness, thinking that was where these spirits belonged. The demons really wanted to be human again because only in flesh could they feel alive again. But their presence didn't bring life. It brought death, leaving brokenness everywhere they went. The prophets and wise people told people not to try to talk to these spirits. People who practiced necromancy, divination, or sorcery often tried to call on them, thinking that their whispers were wise. But any knowledge they gave was bad and caused problems. These lost souls were the last remnants of a rebellion, a time when heaven and earth were tainted by forbidden unions. They didn't care about anyone or anything. They were just hungry beings stuck between worlds. People who were desperate or greedy often let these voices in, even though they knew they would bring ruin to their homes. Demons kept bothering people even after Noah's time. Their presence became a part of the daily problems of life. People thought that unseen spirits were behind these bad things that happened. Crops failed, kids got sick, families broke up, and more. They weren't wrong. These giant spirits wanted to undo what God had fixed. They were jealous of people because men and women still had the chance to be saved, but they were stuck wandering until the end of time. Every time they caused trouble or broke someone's heart, it was their way of fighting against the fate that had been taken from them. People felt them most strongly in ruins and empty places at times. It felt like the spirits of the giants were still in the dust and broken stones of abandoned cities and old battlefields. Travelers said they heard screams when no one was there, and they were terrified for no reason, as if unseen hands were pressing down on them. These were the dead who roamed, the restless children of the fallen, drawn to places where death had ruled. The earth itself seemed scarred by their presence, as if it could still feel the weight of their footsteps and remember their rebellion. People felt the presence of these spirits the most at night, when the shadows grew long and the silence was heavy. They were restless in the dark, moving like whispers on the edges of sleep. The kids woke up crying and couldn't explain what they saw. Elders talked about nightmares that stayed with them after they woke up, making their hearts feel heavy and uneasy. These were the signs that demons were trying to get in, and spirits of giants were looking for a body. People were afraid of them, but they also got used to them because they never stopped wandering. The flood had washed away bodies, but not spirits. What was destroyed in the flesh lived on in the shadow. The demons that roam today are the spirits of the Gi, ants who ruled with violence in the past. Their fate is to wander without peace, their judgment sealed, but their power is still felt. They are not chained up like their fathers were, nor are they killed like regular people. Instead, they are left to remind people of what happens when heaven's order is broken. They still wander, their voices still whisper, and their hunger still seeks the hearts of men. From the very first days after the flood, men still heard whispers of knowledge that should have been lost. Even though Azazel and his friends were locked up, the ideas they planted in people's minds didn't go away. The things they taught, like how to fight, make jewelry, cast spells, make cosmetics, use charms, and learn hidden sciences, stuck with their students. Families passed on bits of this knowledge from father to son and mother to daughter, as if they were protecting something valuable, even though it had been corrupted. And even though the Watchers were chained, their power continued to affect civilizations in both small and huge ways over time. People still thought that metals could be made into weapons even after Azazel was bound. Blacksmiths all over the ancient world used his lessons to shape iron into blades, arrows, and spears. Women wove gold and gems into crowns and necklaces as a way to remember the forbidden beauty that had been shown to them. Over time, these things became so common that people forgot where they came from. But the truth was that what had first been seen as rebellion had now become a part of society. Magic itself, the art of using hidden forces to bend the world to your will, became one of Azazel's most powerful teachings. People started to use words and symbols in rituals to tap into unseen power. Some people tried to talk to the spirits of the dead in the hopes of learning something. Some people carved signs into stones or wrote them on parchment, thinking that the signs themselves were powerful. These things weren't just made up by people. They were pieces of what the Watchers had once shown. Even though they had changed over the years, their roots still went back to the mountain where Azazel first revealed the secrets of heaven. It was never just about tools or symbols. Forbidden knowledge promised power. Men and women learned that they could change things by calling on spirits and aligning themselves with forces that are not visible. For example, they could call for rain, heal wounds, or curse their enemies. But these kinds of things always cost a lot. People who were open to this knowledge often let the wandering spirits of the giants into their lives. The giants wanted to live in bodies again, so magic became a door and demons came through it. What started out as curiosity turned into possession, and people who wanted power often lost themselves completely. This forbidden current flowed quietly beneath the rise of civilizations, even as they grew. Egypt, with its complicated hieroglyphs and rituals for the dead, was a place where knowledge older than its pyramids was shared. Babylon, with its astrology and magic, showed signs of heavenly secrets being used for earthly gain. From the deserts of Arabia to the temples of Greece, from the shamans of Asia to the druids of the West, people seemed to be connected by a hidden thread, a shared inheritance of forbidden knowledge. The people looked and spoke differently, but the things they did were very similar. And though Azazel's voice was quiet, it seemed to echo across continents. The question still stands: does this knowledge still exist? The world has changed, but people still want to have hidden power. Men no longer gather under the stars to carve symbols into stone, but they do read books and manuscripts full of secrets about astrology, alchemy, and other occult sciences. Psychic readings, fortune-telling, and energy manipulation are all new names for modern types of magic. But their essence hasn't changed. People all over the world still want to see what is hidden and control powers that are not meant for humans. Technology has progressed, yet some contend that what is termed science frequently obscures the identical endeavor, the mastery of nature and the subjugation of creation to human will. Not all knowledge is forbidden, but Azazel's teachings echo whenever pride makes people act like gods, change their lives, or find out secrets that are meant to stay hidden. The old temptation is still there, to know more than you should, to have power without wisdom, and to rule without the Creator. That temptation hasn't gone away, it's just changed clothes. Many cultures still openly practice occultism. The cards are mixed up in the dark, with only a candlelight. Astrological charts help people make choices. There are spells and incantations in books and on screens that say they can change your love life, your wealth, or your fate. Some people think these things are harmless and just for fun. But underneath, they all have the same rebellious streak. The spirits that whisper through them are not harmless. They are the same restless souls that have always been around, and they feed on those who give them a place to stay. The link between the past and the present is clearer than most people want to admit. Azazel's work is still going on today. Magic has been a part of human history for a long time, and this shows a desire that can't be ignored. People want power that goes beyond themselves, the ability to change fate or fight against what seems like it will happen. They are like the old generation that eagerly listened to Azazel because they were hungry. They may not know his name, but they are following the path he set long ago. When someone uses rituals, charms, or invocations, they are stepping into a shadow that has been there for thousands of years. The story of forbidden knowledge isn't just old, it's still going on today, and it affects the choices we make. Some traditions say that Azazel's power won't fully go away until the Day of Judgment. They say that his binding in the desert was only a way to keep him from doing anything, not to erase him. They also say that people who are open to dark advice can still hear his whispers. His teachings flow like a river underground, unseen but always close, whether through the restless demons or through a corrupted memory. People may not always know where the water comes from, but they still drink from it, following patterns that have been around since before the flood. So, when you look at the whole history of magic and see it practiced in every country and time, you can't just say it's a coincidence. It is not just a product of imagination or invention. It is an inheritance. The legacy of forbidden knowledge has been around since the Watchers and is still going strong today. Azazel's gift was never taken back. It lives on in rituals, symbols, secret meetings, and the quiet whispers of people who will do anything to get power. It is a reminder that what was once taught in rebellion has become part of the world's rhythm, which keeps going and brings both danger and interest. When the memory of fallen angels and their rebellion weighed heavily on the earth, the holy archangels were there to bring comfort and balance. They weren't just warriors who had to fight against darkness in the past. They are eternal guardians whose mission goes on forever. Their job has always been more than just judging people. They have also been there to guide people, keep the path of truth open, and remind people of the Creator's mercy. The story of the fallen angels is not just about how they went bad and caused trouble. It's also about how the angels who stayed loyal and stood as pillars of light in the face of darkness. People often say that Michael, the archangel of strength, is a warrior who fights against the enemies of heaven. But his future job isn't just to fight heavenly battles, it's also to keep people safe from the unseen forces that want to destroy them. The old scriptures call him the prince who watches over God's people. This protection doesn't stop with the flood or the binding of the watchers. It spans generations, silently observing the trajectory of human history, guaranteeing that malevolence never prevails completely. Michael's role will become even more important in the future, as prophecy says he will rise up when nations are in trouble to protect those who stay faithful. His sword is not only a symbol of war, but also of the protection of justice. It reminds us that light still stands when darkness closes in. On the other hand, Gabriel's presence is full of communication and revelation. He is the one who talks and makes things clear when everything else is confusing. Gabriel was the one who once told prophets what visions meant and sent messages that changed people's lives. In the future, he will still have a role, not just speaking to the hearts of a few chosen people, but also quietly shining the light of truth on all of humanity. When lies spread like wildfire, Gabriel is the voice of truth, reminding people of what has always been. His job is to be both gentle and strong, making sure that people don't get lost in the fog of lies. Raphael, the healer, is a different kind of guardian. His job is not only to heal the wounds of the body, but also to fix what is broken in the spirit. Raphael's work goes on as people continue to deal with the scars left by generations of rebellion. Healing doesn't always happen right away or in a miraculous way. Sometimes it happens slowly, quietly, and without anyone seeing it. His presence will be like a balm on a tired world, helping people find peace and healing. Raphael is the archangel who represents the healing touch of the divine. The brokenness caused by forbidden knowledge, demons, wars, and chaos needs more than judgment. Uriel is the one who brings light and wisdom and shows us what is hidden. People often think of his guidance as fire, but not destructive fire, fire that lights the way and burns away ignorance. People have always fought against darkness, both outside and inside themselves. Uriel's job is to help people find their way when it seems like there is no way. Uriel's presence will help us understand in the days to come when things seem to be going wrong and there is no end in sight. He will show us the way back to the Creator. His fire doesn't burn things up, it clears things up and gives light to those who are willing to walk in truth. The four archangels together stand for balance, strength, revelation, healing, and wisdom. They all have different jobs, but they all work together to help. Their guidance is not limited to visions or appearances. It permeates the lives of individuals in subtle and imperceptible ways. Many people have felt safe when they were in danger, comforted when they were sad, or enlightened when they were very confused. People may not always realize what these moments are, but they are like threads of angelic protection woven into the fabric of human life. These roles will become even more important in the future, as humanity faces challenges that are similar to those faced by the Watchers. The fallen angels used to offer forbidden knowledge, but the archangels still offer pure advice. There is a difference not only in what is said, but also in what is meant. The Watchers wanted to destroy what was good, but the archangels want to protect it. They don't force themselves on people, but they do guide those who are open to the light. Compared to the noise of rebellion, their influence is quiet, but it lasts longer and goes deeper into hearts that want to know the truth. Their guidance is like a compass that points back to what is eternal in every generation. Some traditions say that the archangels will come back into human history, just like they did in the days of Enoch and Noah. People talk about this future moment as both judgment and renewal. Michael will protect the faithful, Gabriel will tell the truth, Raphael will heal the sick, and Uriel will bring light to the dark. Their presence will remind people that even though evil spirits are still around, heaven hasn't left the earth. The Creator's guardians are still there, watching, waiting, and ready to act when the time is right. Their role in the future is not just to be a part of big cosmic events, it also includes the everyday lives of people. Every prayer said in desperation and every cry for help in the dark can get their attention. The archangels don't just watch from afar, they protect us. Their mission is not only big and prophetic, but also very personal. They walk with people, protecting them from things they can't see, whispering words of comfort when they can't sleep, and helping them make decisions when they don't know what to do. People may not always see how close they are, but they are there, doing what they were meant to do forever. The fight between light and darkness will get stronger as people get closer to the end of time. Just like fallen angels ruined the earth, their power still affects people in small ways today. But the balance stays the same because the archangels keep doing their jobs. They show the Creator's mercy by making sure that no matter how dark the shadows get, there is always a brighter light ready to break through. Their future role will be a continuation of their ancient mission, unending, tireless, and faithful. The story of fallen angels would not be complete without the story of the archangels who fight against them. One side offered corruption, while the other offered help. One side caused damage, while the other side heals. The fallen are still bound or lost in the shadows, but the archangels are free, watchful, and always loyal. They will walk with people and carry out their mission until the last pages of history are written. In the future, their job will not only be to fight, but also to guide, heal, protect, and remind the world that the Creator is always there. When the final judgment begins to unfold, the silence of eternity breaks. This moment has been called the ultimate unveiling of truth for generations. The heavens don't just open with soft light, they roar with power, announcing that the time of reckoning has finally come. What was once said in prophecy is now a living reality. The fallen angels who once went against the Creator, taught people things that were wrong, and spread violence and corruption on earth are now openly showing their rebellion. Their long wait in chains of darkness is over, and the courtroom of eternity starts its business. The last day is described with such big pictures that words can only barely do it justice. Mountains shake and break apart like sand, and the seas roar as if they know their Creator's voice. The stars themselves seem to lose their shine in the presence of something bigger. The Almighty's throne shines brighter than anything else, and it is surrounded by countless loyal angels. Their voices rise like thunder, but they stay in harmony, shouting holiness without stopping. In this sea of unimaginable glory, the fallen stand small, defiant yet trembling, knowing that the time they feared has come. The fallen angels, led by their leaders Semjaza and Azazel, used to think they could avoid being judged by hiding in the shadows of time. Their chains in the dark were not the end. They were a place to wait until the day of judgment. Now that day has come, there is no more time to wait. The Book of Deeds is opened, not just for people, but also for the heavenly beings who left their posts. Every action is remembered. Every act of rebellion, every act of corruption, and every whisper of deceit to people is written down. What they did on the mountains of earth, what they taught men and women about weapons, magic, and vanity, and the destruction they caused, all of it is read before the eternal throne. The archangels, who have been waiting for this moment for a long time, are there to see it happen. Michael, who fought them, Gabriel, who said they would die, Raphael, who tied up Azazel, and Uriel, who shone light on what they did. All of them testify. The fallen can't get away now. Their arguments lose strength in the light of truth, and the Creator's justice shines brighter than any excuse. The great judge does not rush. He has a perfect memory and perfect balance. Each fallen angel knows how heavy his rebellion is and how it will affect the future. There is no way to measure how scared the fallen were at that moment. They were once beings of light, dressed in the beauty of heaven. Now they stand without their glory, their faces twisted by their own sin. They look at who they were and who they are now, and they are filled with despair. The giants they made, whose spirits became the wandering demons of the world, cry out as witnesses to their rebellion. Humanity's history shows that they were once tricked and led astray by their forbidden knowledge. Everything that exists becomes a witness to their rebellion and its cost. The sentence is said with finality. The fire that was made for Azazel from the start becomes his prison forever. He taught men how to fight and how to be vain. The desert of Dudael, where he used to be tied up, was just a place to wait. Now he is thrown into the eternal fire, where he will never rise again or lie again. His chains can't be broken because they are made of eternal judgment, not iron from this world. His cries of defiance are drowned out by silence, and his name becomes a warning to anyone who goes against him. Semjaza, who was in charge of the 200, is now fully responsible for their actions. His promise on Mount Hermon and the oath he made his brothers take are proof of his rebellion. He is also thrown into the void, where he is chained and can't see any light. His voice, which used to be full of power, now only echoes in the walls of eternal darkness. The same thing happens to the others who follow him. The stars they used to look at now shine too far away for them to reach, because their prison is cut off from the light of heaven. The fire that burns them is not the fire of the earth. It is a fire that never goes out. It's not just destruction, it's separation. Separation from the Creator's presence, from the glory they once knew, and from the light they left behind. The Pa'abt, Ayin, is not just in the fire, it's also in the memories. They think about what they had, what they lost, and what they can never get back. This eternal exile is their last punishment, and it goes on forever. The fallen angels are not the only ones who will be judged. People are also gathered, and each soul stands before the throne. But for those who are faithful, there is mercy. The Creator remembers those who stayed strong, fought against evil, and looked for the truth in the middle of chaos. The rainbow that God gave Noah is now a sign that has come true. It is a reminder that even in judgment, there is hope for those who hold on to the Creator. But there is no such promise for the fallen angels. Their choice was final. Their rebellion was over, and their fate was sealed from the start. The cries of the dead do not change what happens. Their pleas, their regrets, and their defiance are all swallowed up by the law of eternity. Justice isn't mean, it's perfect. What started as a rebellion must end in judgment. The day that Enoch saw in visions and that prophets talked about is finally here. Heaven and earth watch as the enemies of light are thrown into their last home. The abyss closes over them, and it will never open again. Creation breathes out, as if a heavy load has been lifted, as the fallen disappear into their eternal fate. The corruption that started with one oath on Mount Hermon and spread across the world through violence and lies is finally over. There are no more watchers who left their posts. The demons who wandered around find their master chained up for good. The world that used to shake because of them now looks forward to renewal, because judgment is not just the end, but also the start of restoration. The final judgment shows us what ultimate justice looks like and reminds us that the Creator sees every act of rebellion. The fallen angels who once seemed powerful and walked among men, using their forbidden gifts to shape civilizations, now have to face the truth of eternity. Their story fades away, but the light of heaven stays strong. What started with defiance ends with chains that last forever, and what started with corruption ends with fire that lasts forever. The heavens, the earth, and all of creation testify. Justice has spoken, and the fallen have met their end. As the long story comes to a peaceful end, a deep stillness seems to settle over everything, like the calm after rain when the ground is soft and the air feels lighter. We've read stories about angels and people, about rebellion and mercy, about secret knowledge and judgment that lasts forever. These stories, which have been passed down from generation to generation, are not just records of the past. They are also reminders for the heart. They tell you to be careful of pride, temptation, and straying from the truth, but they also whisper of hope, guidance, and Allah's never-ending mercy. When you listen to them, it's like being next to a river at night and hearing it flow steadily. You know it has been flowing since the beginning and will keep flowing long after. The sound is calming, even though the current is strong. It reminds me that the Creator's plan is always moving forward. When we think about the fallen angels, their mistakes, and their punishment, we see how pride can lead even the most beautiful beings away from the light. The Watchers were not normal beings. They were very beautiful and powerful beings, but they fell short because they forgot to obey. Their story is an ibarat, a lesson carved into stone that says that power without humility becomes a chain and desire without restraint. Comes destruction. But there is comfort in that warning too, because people were not left behind. Allah sent His angels, messengers, and reminders over and over again to show people the right way. He sent correction where there was wrongdoing. He brought hope where there was none. These stories are like mirrors for us. They ask us to look inside ourselves and see where pride might get in the way of our prayers, where fear might make us stop praying, or where temptations might pull us away. And just as the archangels stood strong to protect the order of heaven and carry out Allah's orders, we are reminded that there is always someone nearby to protect us. For Allah's mercy is wider than the oceans and softer than the night breeze. Every soul that turns sincerely finds doors of mercy opening. As you think about these things, picture the peaceful scene after the final judgment. The fallen are gone, trapped in darkness, and creation can breathe freely again. The good people are surrounded by light and gardens that never fade, where rivers flow forever and no sadness can enter. This vision is not just for the distant future, it is also a seed for today. We walk toward that eternal peace every time we choose honesty over lying, kindness over anger, and remembering over forgetting. Life, with all its trials, may feel heavy at times. There are nights when worries keep the heart from sleeping and questions weigh on the soul. But stories like these show us that the Creator knows everything. Every tear, every prayer, and every moment of waiting is seen. He remembers everyone who turns to Him, just like He remembered Noah during the flood and Enoch for his faithfulness. There is peace in knowing that no good deed is ever wasted and that no sin is too big to be forgiven if we truly want to find Him. As you lie back, let this truth sink in. The same Lord who rules the stars, commands the angels, and brought justice to the fallen also watches over you. His mercy is beyond what you can imagine, and His love is with you even when you feel the most alone. Imagine a night sky full of stars when you close your eyes. Each star is like a reminder to follow Him, and each shimmer is a soft call back to Him. There may be a lot of noise and problems in the world, but remembering Him brings peace to hearts. Take a deep breath and let it relax your chest. Picture peace coming into you with each breath, and let go of the day's heaviness with each breath out. These stories were not meant to scare people. They were meant to wake up their hearts and show that the light of Allah never goes out, even when things are bad and people are rebelling. His plan is always right, His justice is always fair, and His mercy is always there. So let's say dua at this last moment. May Allah make your days easier, your nights peaceful, and every step you take clear. May He keep you safe from whispers of pride and temptation, and may He send His angels to watch over you, as they do for all who believe. May He give you wisdom, kindness, and peace in your home. And when things get tough, remember what these old stories taught you. His mercy is deeper than anything else, and His power is greater than anything else. As you fall asleep, remember this: you are never forgotten. Allah knows everything about you, just like the sky holds billions of stars. He knows what you're afraid of, what you're going through, what you've been praying for, and what you hope for but haven't said. He is closer to you than your breath, closer to you than your thoughts, and more merciful than any love you have ever known. Let that closeness bring you peace, let it lighten your load, and let it remind you that tomorrow is in His hands, which are always steady. Now that the stories have been told and the lessons learned, you can rest easy knowing that the night is ready to hold you. May your dreams be peaceful, your soul be lightened, and your path be made clear. And may these words stay in your heart tonight. Allah is merciful, Allah is just, and Allah is with you. Ya Allah, give peace to those who hear this story. Fill their hearts with light and bring them closer to you. Forgive their mistakes, bless their families, and give them peace in this life and happiness in the next. Ameen.